The blonde delinquent begs to be spared, but without an ounce of mercy, this huge guy finishes him off and his head falls like a basketball. The Mountain of Muscles lists 8 faces and swears that each one of them and their relatives will die in 1 year. Why? What if you woke up from a coma and were hit with camera flashes right in your face? The reporter asks, how do you feel knowing that your mother and father were lit up on live TV? This skinny boy couldn't believe what he just heard, and a panic attack episode sets in. The doctors rush to put him to sleep again. He dives deep into his dreams while remembering the faces that put him on this bed. A long time passes and he wakes up again. It's just his aunt by his side who explains it all. After the school incident, his parents tried to fight for justice, but the families of those involved were extremely powerful. Through corruption, money, and bribery, they were able to get the case to end with just an apology. His parents insisted on pressing for actual punishment, but they didn't know they were facing the most powerful families in the whole country. In the end, they decided to die together in the middle of the main road. No one knows if that was intentional or if it was a threat that pushed them to the limit and caused this. As the story hits the boy's ears, he can't help but dive deeper and deeper into despair. His story became known across all of Korea. Sitting on his bed, the protagonist showed his thirst for revenge. His parents had sacrificed everything so he could have justice and protection. After a long time had passed, a woman showed up to rent a new apartment. As she spoke with the building manager, she made casual small talk, but he only had one concern. She was never to go to the top floor, and access there was strictly forbidden. She wondered why, but he said the top floor of that building was a place no one was allowed to enter. She was never to cross that line, and if she rented the apartment, she had to stay within her assigned area. If she wasn't willing to follow those rules, he could cancel the rental himself. The woman said that was fine, though she stayed curious about why the top floor was off limits. Still, they closed the deal, and she became the new tenant. And in that place, in a room on the top floor, someone was living there. And that someone was our protagonist, living a painfully lonely life. On his computer, he pulled up every news report released during those 9 months he'd spent unconscious, because he knew nothing about what had happened. So he kept filling himself in on everything, even though it only made him feel worse, forcing him to relive things he didn't want to see. Then a rent payment reminder popped up on his phone, along with a notice that the money for it had been deposited. Apparently, someone else was paying his rent. Back at the computer, he kept digging through information. Then he heard knocking at the door, and when he opened it, a harsh light hit his face as a woman stepped inside. She was the same woman who had taken care of him when he was sick, and now she was helping him adjust to life after leaving the hospital. She told him he needed to go outside sometimes. If he kept living like this, every time he opened the door, the sunlight would practically blind him. His room was filled with trash bags, since he didn't even go out to throw them away. She said living like this wasn't human. Looking at his computer, she asked what he was doing, then mentioned she had a group session that night, so she needed to finish his consultation quickly. She began asking several questions about his condition, and apparently everything only hurt a little. After her evaluation, we realized that 2 years had already passed since everything happened. She and his doctor were reaching their limit, and he needed to start building healthier habits. But the protagonist barely listened and kept scrolling on his phone. She said that if he wouldn't go back to school, he at least needed to go outside, get some fresh air, and try meeting people. But he stayed silent. And after she left his apartment, he went right back to his computer. He plugged in his phone to charge and used an app to try getting into a private group, the one belonging to the classmates who had done that to him. Basically, he was trying to hack his way in. After a while, he succeeded and spent a long time reading their messages. The bastards were living carefree, like nothing had ever happened. He realized that while he had been trapped in that state, those guys were out having fun, paying nothing for what they'd done. And with every message he read, the rage in his chest only grew, making him clench his teeth. Lying on his bed and staring at the ceiling, he kept thinking about what he should do, when suddenly something seemed to come screaming down from the sky and slammed directly into his building. He wondered what the hell that was, and stared at the door in fear. He says it sounded like something crashing into something else, and he thought it might be a burglar. As he approached the door, memories of what had happened came flooding back, and he felt a crushing pain in his chest. Still, forcing himself onward, he decided to open the door and face whatever had made that sound. When he undid all the locks, the daylight was brighter than ever. But once he focused, he realized something very strange had happened. A flaming sword had torn across the sky and landed right on his rooftop. It was stuck in the ground and still seemed to be burning. After the flames died down, the protagonist, whose name is Se-young, walked toward it. He couldn't understand why the hell a sword had fallen there. Who sent it, how, and why? Unable to make sense of it, he gave up trying. As he got closer, he noticed it looked a lot like the kind of sword you'd see in an online game, though he couldn't remember the name. Taking a closer look, he realizes it might be a Zweihander, a two-handed sword from the Renaissance. Looking at the ground, he notices it isn't cold at all, so maybe it really is stuck there. Either way, he's deeply unsettled by it, especially since the doors leading to the rooftop are still locked, so there's no way someone from below could have done this. He keeps asking himself how any of this happened, and what the hell he's looking at. After racking his brain for an answer, he finally lets out a huge scream that could probably be heard by everyone in the building. Then he gives up and decides to leave the sword where it is, wherever it came from, whoever drove it into his roof. He just heads back to his room and lies down, but what he doesn't realize is that he won't be able to ignore it, because out of nowhere, drum-like sounds start coming from outside. The sword is making noise. He tries to ignore it, but eventually that becomes impossible. And while he's sleeping, he starts having strange dreams where he seems to be in the middle of a war, surrounded by soldiers. Far ahead, he sees a man in a red cape, apparently holding a sword identical to the one on his roof. Beyond him, countless giant monsters charge forward. The moment the man draws the blade, an enormous force surges out, basically disintegrating them. That man's power with the sword is overwhelming. And while Sejong is distracted by the steam it releases, he opens his eyes to see a massive pile of monsters forming. And above them, the sword he saw is lodged there. Clearly, it's something immensely powerful. That image burns itself into his mind. When he opens his eyes, he's sitting on his bed and wondering if that was really just a dream, because it felt far too real. But the drumming is still coming from out there. He wonders if the sword is actually real or just a product of his imagination. He runs outside, opens the door, and sees that it's still there. But now it's on fire again. This time the flames are huge, and he has to find some way to put them out. So he rushes to the bathroom and fills a bucket with water. But his body is so weak he can barely drag it. Still, with all his strength, he manages to carry it over and throw it onto the fire. After struggling with the flames for quite a while, he finally puts them out, but not without burning himself a little and badly straining his arms. At last, the sword looks normal again. Then he glances to the side and notices there's just a hose and a faucet right there. Meaning all that effort could have been avoided. He could have simply turned on the hose. Even so, he decides to leave the sword where it is. There isn't much else he can do. He goes back to his room and lies down again. After a long nap, another day arrives, and when he opens the door again, the sword is burning once more. It's already been 4 days since this started. This time, he just turns on the faucet, grabs the hose, and puts the fire out. He knows the whole situation is becoming routine. Every time he wakes up and opens the door, the sword is in flames. It's starting to feel normal, though he still hasn't figured out where those drum beats come from. The same ones that keep tormenting him while he sleeps. He keeps asking why the fire keeps reigniting and what kind of sword this even is. When he lies down again, he can't sleep because of the hellish noise. This time he's had enough. All he wants is some peace. So he goes out to the rooftop and decides he's ending this. Sitting in front of it on a chair, he wonders what he can do. Then he decides to watch the sword and see exactly when the fire starts. And the second the flames appear, he tries to douse them with the hose. It almost feels like the sword is mocking him, but he refuses to let this keep happening, so he keeps putting the fire out. Back in his room, he starts searching online for a way to solve the problem. The solution he lands on is holy water and a cross. Then he starts praying for the thing to leave. He's convinced it's something evil, so with the cross in hand and holy water ready, he splashes it and tells it to go away. Instead, the flames grow even stronger. Still, he doesn't lose faith and keeps praying for it to disappear, which changes absolutely nothing. He keeps praying anyway, but it still doesn't help. At least the flames seem to die down during the day. Though he knows this has become unbearable, he can't sleep anymore, and every day he has to put out that fire. So he decides that today, he's ending this misery. Approaching the sword, he grabs a toolbox and charges at it with a hammer, trying to smash it. But the instant he strikes, the hammerhead snaps clean in half and flies into the wall, where it sticks. Still refusing to quit, he runs back into his room and grabs a baseball bat. Determined, he swings at it, putting all his strength into the blow. But all that happens is the bat rebounds straight into his face, hitting him hard. He's beyond furious with that sword. He can't take this anymore. He can't get a single minute of peace. He's determined to finish this. Gripping the hilt firmly, he decides that once and for all, he's pulling it out. And one of them isn't walking away. But the moment he tries, the flames flare up again. This time with even greater force. He can't understand why, because they usually only appear at night, and it's still daytime. Looking at the sword, he sees a huge fireball forming at its tip, and in an instant it slams into him. He feels like his entire body is being torn apart. Countless memories of war flood his mind. The pain is unbearable, and wave after wave of memories crash into him. It's as if he's living all those moments at once. Even so, he somehow manages to yank it free from the ground, then collapses, still clutching it. Down below, the women living in the building are talking about all the noise, saying it's gotten seriously disturbing. More than angering them, the sounds are starting to unsettle them because they're so strange. The landlord had told them no one was allowed on that floor, so now they're wondering if someone might actually be trapped up there, if something terrible could be happening. They don't even know who lives in that unit. One of them says she already called the building manager to report the noise, and they even wonder if they should call the police, since they've heard screams for days. But another says she already brought that up, and all the manager told her was that as long as the residents seemed fine, there was no need to involve the police. The others think that's a ridiculous excuse and don't fully buy it. But the manager says he'll call the owner and get back to them later. Back up on the rooftop, Sejong slowly regains consciousness. He wonders what exactly he saw, saying it felt like a dream, except far too real to be one. He clutches his chest with both hands, as if he's been hit with countless emotions all at once, like he's lived innumerable lives. When he gets up, he sees the sword still beside him. He can't even remember how he pulled it out, but when he looks at the hole where it had been embedded, his fear is gone, and the opening has already closed. Then he notices its size. It's a full meter longer than it seemed while it was stuck there. It's a gigantic sword. When he tries to lift it, he realizes it's incredibly heavy and can barely hold it. He ends up falling with it onto his chest, but after a lot of effort, he manages to lean it against the wall. As he studies it, a voice echoes in his head, telling him it's a sword of war. Then the same voice says it's a bearer of thunder and storms, and that this isn't its true name, just one someone once gave it. Sejong wonders why he's like this now and how he suddenly knows these things. Then countless messages seem to echo in his mind, telling him that if he stands firm, all he needs to do is never bow, to always keep the courage and will to fight. Somehow those words inspire him. They make him grip the sword the way it's meant to be held. His mind fills with combat techniques, and in his thoughts he can perform them perfectly. He figures all he has to do is copy those movements. But when he tries to do it for real, all he manages is to fall over with the sword on top of him again and let out another scream. Back in his room, the woman who looks after him comes to visit. After all, he called her for help, since the sword's weight and force ended up injuring him. She's surprised, though. He never calls her. Earlier, she'd been busy with something, apparently in the middle of meeting someone, when her phone started ringing. She said she had to take it, and the moment she answered, Sejong was asking for help. So she apologized to the man she was with and ran off. Now, in his room, she explains that she had to ditch a guy just to come see him, then asks what happened. He stays quiet, but she presses him. What did he do to tear the ligaments in both wrists? Even his hip seems injured. He says he was exercising, which makes her burst out laughing. He hasn't even walked a few steps in over 2 years, so the idea that he was working out sounds absurd. Then the phone beside them starts ringing again, and when she answers, she introduces herself as his nurse, and for the first time, we hear her name. It's Kim Bora. On the phone, she says she's in charge of his regular checkups for Takei Sejong, the protagonist himself. Apparently, the caller is the cynical landlord, already complaining. He says he's been hearing a lot of screaming from this room, and asks how Sejong is doing. Bora replies that he seems fine, and mentally he looks stable too. Then she asks the protagonist to make some noise, just so the man can hear that he's really okay. Sejong answers with a sound and says his name. Bora says that should be enough, and once she hangs up, she asks why he's doing this, because several people in the building have been complaining about the noise. The protagonist stays quiet, trying to play it off, then admits he's been feeling so frustrated, it's like his body might explode, and yelling was his way of letting it out. At that moment, his nurse starts remembering all the times she cared for him in the hospital, and her chest tightens a little at the thought. Her attitude softens, and she starts treating him more kindly. She says she'll change his bandages regularly, and that he can remove the cast once he's able to move the joint, but not to push it too often. She adds that it may be hard to visit him frequently, but she'll do her best to come by every Tuesday and Thursday. Though next week, unfortunately, she won't be able to make it. The protagonist resents it. He doesn't need her, and doesn't even want to see her. After she leaves, while he lies on his bed, he sees the sword underneath it. He tries lifting it again and sets it on top of the mattress. His hands still hurt badly. They were practically broken. Then that strange voice starts echoing in his head again, telling him that anyone who never falls never learns how to rise. He's still unnerved by hearing it at all, since he's alone in that room, and somehow the voice feels oddly familiar. Those words keep repeating in his mind, telling him to run with the sword and swing it until exhaustion takes him. His head is still a mess, wondering what that even means. How is swinging a sword supposed to make him stronger? After doing a quick search online, he finds accounts from different people describing their results after 4 months of practicing with a two-handed sword. Once he sees the many movements he's supposed to learn, he knows he has to follow that path. As he stares at his sword, the voice keeps telling him to swing it until he drops from exhaustion. A little later, his nurse visits again, and while looking at his hands, she wonders how they're already healing. Something like that should take around 3 weeks, yet somehow he's nearly recovered. She asks if he used some strange medicine to speed it up. The protagonist stays quiet, and she warns him not to overdo it just because he feels better, that he still needs to rest, because if anything happens, the blame will fall on her. She leaves looking annoyed, and the protagonist just waits for the moment she's gone. After that, he flexes his hands and realizes they feel completely fine. Now, with the sword in hand, those voices in his head keep echoing, and the more he hears them, the more motivated he becomes. He starts wondering if that man in his memories is somehow watching him. The command to swing the sword as if his life depended on it keeps pounding in his mind, and with the blade in his hands, he heads to the rooftop to try his first movements. It goes badly. She's far too heavy. Even lifting the sword is already a challenge, so he figures it might be better to rebuild his stamina first. He needs to get outside, run a little, and build some endurance. At this point, he couldn't care less about the neighbors. It's been 2 years since he even set foot on the stairs. In his memory, the former owner of that sword was already running around with it at 12 years old. So for now, all he needs to do is eat and run, until he builds up some real endurance. Strapping the sword to his back, he thinks he can at least do some squats. Before all this happened, maybe he could do around 30. So with the sword on his back, trusting his body, he figures he can probably manage 10. But when he actually tries, the idiot can't do even 1, and ends up face first on the rooftop. In his head, the voice keeps echoing, "Run with the sword, swing it until exhaustion takes you." He heads heads back to his room and eats a heavy meal. Lying on his bed, he says he feels full, and after eating, he waits for the sun to set so the stairwell will be more empty. Then he begins his first real challenge, running up and down the stairs. As soon as he starts descending, he understands. He has to keep going until he's spent, until he truly can't move anymore. But after just one flight, his whole body already feels wrecked. And to make it worse, he falls with the sword. On the floor, he tells himself he has to keep running no matter what, because he needs to get stronger. So with slow, painful steps, he keeps going up and down the stairs, pushing his body to the limit. By the time he gets back to the rooftop, he's done 4 round trips on those stairs and feels like he can't do another. His body is completely spent. But then the memory of those 8 classmates who did that to him comes rushing back, and it lights a fire in his chest, pushing him to do it one more time. After several weeks pass, the trash bags that had been piling up in his room are all stacked outside at once, creating a pretty shocking sight. Lying in bed with the sword still resting on his chest, the protagonist feels his stomach growling, so he gets up to make food. What's strange is that the more he eats, the hungrier he seems to get. Even while cooking, he stretches his forearm with one hand. Back on the rooftop, he's now doing a full 100 push-ups, and for someone who couldn't do even one, that's massive progress. In his mind, that voice keeps guiding him, saying the less time he rests between exercises, the stronger he'll become, along with his skin and muscles. So the protagonist gets back up and refuses to stop training. Pouring out every drop of sweat, he runs those stairs again, and this time he completes 8 full round trips. With that done, the next step is practicing the sword forms, and his goal now is to begin with 100 swings. The voice in his head continues guiding him, telling him to perform each motion as slowly as possible, so he can build balance and control over the sword. Then it keeps asking him what the purpose of his life is, and what his goal really is. The protagonist believes he has only one goal, and that is revenge. Those horrific scenes replay in his mind, feeding that desire even more. And when he lies down on his bed again, there's already a clear change in his appearance. He looks sturdier now, and even seems taller. That day, his nurse comes to visit. After sending a message as a surprise, she's already at his door. But when he opens it, the protagonist is already waiting for her. She wonders how he knew she was coming, but he still doesn't answer. After checking his blood pressure, she starts the exam asking how he's feeling. He gives the same answer as always. Everything hurts a little. She says it's time he said something different and admitted what his real condition is, but he repeats that everything just hurts a little, and that finally gets on her nerves. She tells him the doctor wrote in his report that he was practically healed, which means he's ready to start doing normal things again. Then she brings up school, saying it may be time for him to go back. If he waits too long, people there will start calling him an old man. She tells him that if he does return, he should make a few friends so he won't go through that kind of thing again. The protagonist steps closer, and before she can finish, he says he'll never go back to school. She answers in a nervous tone, asking if she heard him right, but when she looks at him, she notices something strangely different. Then she asks when he got so tall, because when she first met him, he wasn't even 1.60 meters, while she was 1.68, so she used to be taller than him. She asks him to stand up straight and wonders how she hadn't noticed it sooner. Looking at his stomach, she sees he's put on muscle, and somehow shot up in height too. She knows kids grow fast, but nothing like this. When she touches his body, she realizes how muscular he is, and her eyes practically light up. Cutting back, the protagonist continues his rooftop training, and now he has the biggest goal of his life: to swing the sword enough times to receive the sword's blessing and become even stronger, pushing both his body and mind to their limit. Only then, he believes, will he earn true indomitability, and to do that, he has to swing the war sword 10,000 times a day without stopping. The protagonist knows all of this comes from a fragment of memory he can't explain, and that it all started after he touched the sword. Still, he follows those teachings relentlessly, day after day. He knows he hasn't even reached 10% of what lies ahead, but he keeps pushing harder and harder. Then, a year passes. In the city, a new president is elected. On a giant screen, he gives the usual political speech everyone gives. One of his aides congratulates him, saying his dream has finally come true. He is now the president of Korea. Jong Sung has become the 21st elected president, and this man is very bad news for the protagonist, and not just for him. In Korea, one of his aides walks in and tells him there's a call for him. It's from the Shinjin group, congratulating him on winning the election. To celebrate, they say the whole family should be brought together. Then the new president says something unsettling. He says it's time for those children who had a rough patch in the United States to come back home. The protagonist hears the announcement on his computer. That man is the father of one of the girls involved in what was done to him, so he instantly knows this election won't mean anything good for him. Still, it won't stop him from doing what he has to do. One of the president's staff members approaches and says his daughter has decided to return. Her name is Soo-jung. He believes she suffered while she was away, but by now she must have grown up. The president says everything that happened is in the past, and that the time apart gave their parents the chance to prepare for bigger things. He lets out a sinister laugh. At Incheon International Airport, we finally see 3 members of the group that ruined the protagonist's life. The girl is Yojin, the guy on the right is Suho, and the one with white hair is Junhyuk. And yeah, their names are a lot to keep up with. A little farther ahead, we see 3 more. One of them is Ryui, the one with the green, or maybe blonde hair is Changsu, and the one with his hair tied back is Dahoon. You probably won't remember all these names. Honestly, neither will I. For the first time in ages, they greet each other again. After so long apart, they ask how everyone's been. One of them asks where Soohyun and Soojung are, since only 6 of them are here when there were 8 in total. She says the other two slipped off to Japan and aren't around right now. One of the girls wanted to clear her head for a few days, and after they split up, two of them ended up staying together. The white-haired one says it wasn't hard to find out where he lives, and the he they mean is the protagonist. The blonde one asks if he's planning to set something up, and he says of course, they need to thank him for all the time they spent in detention. Cutting away, the protagonist is on the phone with his aunt. She asks if he still doesn't want to go back to school, and if he plans to live like this forever. He says he doesn't want to go back. She tells him all she does is worry about him. He knows that, and says he'll think about it just to bring the call to an end. His aunt apologizes for pressuring him so much, but says she's just deeply worried. He tells her he knows she's only acting out of concern, and that it's okay. She says if he ever needs anything, he can call her for help. Then they hang up. By now, the protagonist has become almost monstrous, and in his mind, he vows to deal with every one of the people who did this to him. Across from his building, someone is already watching him. After checking the signal, the man realizes that whoever lives on the top floor hasn't stepped outside at all. They try every way they can to make contact with the resident, just to confirm the protagonist really lives there. This is one of the people investigating for the group that hurt him. Basically, someone tied to their families. But all the information they managed to get points to the protagonist indeed living there. After receiving orders, we cut to the two of them in a car, talking about what they've learned about him, but the white-haired one gets furious. They couldn't even get a photo to see what he looks like now. The blonde says the guy never even steps outside, so spying on him has been nearly impossible. The white-haired one keeps cursing, saying the guy doesn't even go to school, and if he never leaves the apartment, they'll have a hard time doing anything. Maybe the only option is to break into his apartment. The blonde suggests they deal with the lock and go in to take care of him. The white-haired one likes the idea and throws an arm around him, saying he always knows how to entertain him. Still, before doing anything, he says he needs to talk to Sue Ryan first. He might already have plans of his own. Sue Ryan, if you don't remember, is one of the 8 now in Japan with the president's daughter. The white-haired one says he didn't go to Japan just to fool around. He probably joined the Yakuza, and if that's true, he must have gotten quite the welcome gift. The best gift they could give him would be to catch the protagonist and hand him over on a platter. Then for the first time, they post a group photo together on social media. The protagonist sees it on his phone and stares at it almost fondly, a smile rising in his eyes. In the caption, they call for the other two to come back as soon as possible, so all of them can be together again. This is exactly the moment the protagonist had been waiting for, and among those 8, he fully intends to be there too. Deep down, he eagerly waits for the day they're finally all reunited. At Narita International Airport, 2 men tell them they thought they'd stay away from Korea a little longer. But Soo-jung's father has become president, which has made certain things easier and opened the way for their return. For the first time, we see the final 2. Once they get in the car, they start talking on the way. They are Soo-jung and Sun-hyun, the last 2 members of the group of 8. Both he and the girl come from very powerful families. In the car, they talk a bit about how they met, and apparently it happened during an exchange program in the United States. They thank the men for all the support they've been given during their time in Japan. The reply is simple. Friends help friends, and their families have interests aligned, so helping each other is only natural. They're also told that once they get back, some bodyguards will be sent to stay close to them. On his phone, one of the men sees a message from one of the 8, saying he's going to play with the protagonist first. He's tired of waiting for him. Meanwhile, in a speeding car, 2 men head toward the protagonist's apartment. As they bicker for no real reason, one says there's nothing to worry about. Their target hasn't even finished high school. The bald driver suggests they go in together since this is a break-in. The other guy says not to worry, he'll go alone. They keep arguing pointlessly as they move ahead with the job, but after the stupid back and forth, the black-haired one says he'll grab him and drag him back to the car. With that, he enters the building. After forcing the door, he reaches the protagonist's rooftop level. Looking around, he realizes the place feels almost abandoned. Even the home itself seems to have no windows. When he gets to the door, before he can decide what to do, he notices it's already open. Inside, all he can see is a vast darkness. Watching the time on his own phone, his partner starts wondering where he is. The guy's taking way too long. Maybe something happened after he went up alone to the protagonist's place. So he decides to head up and find out what's going on. When he reaches the rooftop, he sees the door is open too. He mutters about how stupid his partner is. Leaving the door open makes it easy for the neighbors to notice. As he nears the protagonist's room, he peeks inside, but in an instant he's caught off guard and dragged into the darkness. Outside, after a while, some workers nearby start wondering why a car has been left abandoned there. The same car those 2 men arrived in. With no one coming back for it, they'll have to tow it away. One of them mentions that the building where it's parked is under personal surveillance. The other looks nervous and wonders if something happened. His coworker explains that they're required to check the area regularly, and with a strange car sitting out front, they need to stay alert and report it immediately. Meanwhile, back in the room of those 2, they complain that it's already 11, and there's still no word from the men they sent to the protagonist's apartment. The blonde keeps trying to reach them, but gets nothing. The white-haired one grows impatient and demands that he fix this somehow. So the blonde ends up calling his uncle, the very man who hired those 2 in the first place. He asks if the job's been done, but his uncle says he hasn't heard back either. The 2 men have vanished. His uncle wonders what the hell they're doing and why they haven't finished the job. The blonde says maybe they were amateurs and somehow botched the mission. Hearing that, the uncle is furious, thinking this brat has no idea who he's talking to. His men are all trained professionals, and if anyone here is an amateur, it's him. The blonde keeps talking, saying that if he'd known this would happen, he and the white-haired guy would have gone there themselves to handle it. That really sets the uncle off. especially since he was already doing them a favor, supposedly. He keeps cursing at him over the phone, and inside the protagonist's room, their phones keep ringing. On the floor lie their bodies, horribly mangled. In silhouette, we can make out the protagonist, the one who turned them into a human carpet. Back at Incheon International Airport, the final two have arrived together, Soo-jung and the other guy whose name I forgot. A little farther on, they meet a woman named Nam Ho-jung. She's part of the Secret Service. And behind her, a man calling himself Professor Yang appears. Professor Yang says it had been a while since he'd seen the two of them, then adds that Soo-hyun's father wanted to see him immediately. He'd been ordered to bring him in at once, so the girl was separated from the guy, and the two went their separate ways. Elsewhere in the city, a man was speaking with the blonde guy's uncle. The uncle was furious, demanding to know what had happened to the men he'd hired, and ordering him to find them immediately, or he'd answer to him. The other man got mad too, wondering what his men were doing. They were supposed to do their job, and this guy was the leader of the organization behind those operations. So he started calling around to his men, asking if anyone had seen the missing pair, but no one knew anything, and he began wondering what the hell was going on. So he decided to go himself to the place they'd been sent. When he arrived, he asked his driver if that was really the address. As he approached the parking area, he noticed a red notice saying the car had been impounded, and after checking the plate number, he realized the vehicle belonged to his organization. Looking at the time, he understood the two had made it there, but vanished after that. Later, the car had been towed away. Then we cut back to the blonde guy's uncle, as he enters the organization he'd hired, looking for its leader. When he gets there, he finds only one terrified underling. Seeing him, the uncle asks where everyone went. The man says the boss and several others had gone to Takashung's house, which was actually the protagonist's place. Then the boss answers his phone. While the uncle is still seething, the leader explains they've got a problem. The two men sent there have disappeared, and there's something very strange inside that house. Something very bad may have happened. The uncle asks if he called in more men to handle it safely. The leader says he's going to check the place, and he brought a bunch of his guys with him. After gathering a large group, they start moving in on the building. As they climb the stairs, the leader tells them to grab him and show no mercy. When they reach the rooftop, they get ready to go in. But while the leader is still on the stairs, all he hears are screams. At first, he assumes the mission is over, that it's done. Though with all that screaming, maybe his men had gone overboard. But when he reaches the top of the stairs, he finds one of his men in critical condition, probably already dead. His face says it all. He was absolutely terrified. As he moved toward the door, he saw a huge beast, and that beast was our protagonist, more monstrous than ever. The moment he saw him, the guy dropped to the floor, his body frozen, unable to move. In his head, there was only one thought: who the hell was this? The protagonist didn't hesitate. He struck him down. Sometime later, one of the building's female tenants was telling a worker there about the screams they'd been hearing. She said she was so scared she hadn't even been able to sleep these past few days. The police say they'll check the perimeter. They know security cameras caught several gang members entering the building, so something likely happened. As they climb the stairs, they notice the door has been broken, with the lock lying on the floor. They look shaken, but they still have to check. When they reach the doorway, they knock even though it's already open. As they open it, the protagonist appears in the frame, and his head can't even be fully seen. He looked monstrous. The police are stunned by his appearance, but when they look behind him, they find a horrifying sight: a pile of all the men who tried to invade his apartment. The protagonist had taken care of every one of them without mercy. Police and ambulances quickly surrounded the area. Arriving by car, the blonde guy's uncle wonders what's going on there. Looking at the stretchers, he sees several bodies being carried out. While upstairs, the police question the protagonist, and he explains he doesn't even have a citizen registration number yet because he still isn't 18. He says his name is Takase Ongi, and that he used to attend Nungwang High School, but he dropped out in his second year, and everyone already knew why. The police wonder if this is really that same boy, and start reporting everything back to the station. He tells everyone there to leave the scene immediately, because even though he was nearly 2 meters tall, he still wasn't 18. They couldn't just act against a minor, especially knowing his history. If they did anything to him, the media would tear into them for it. So they realize arresting or punishing him would be extremely complicated and would need to be discussed carefully. For now, they decide the best move is to clear the scene and figure out later how to handle it. The two officers immediately decide to leave. Back in his room, the protagonist calls his aunt after everything that happened. He tells her he's decided to go to the United States. His aunt asks if he's sure, sounding happy about the decision. She says she'll talk to his uncle and sort out the details right away. But the protagonist says it isn't time yet. Not now. Later. He says he wants to travel for a year, and his first goal is to see all of Korea. Since he's still underage, he can't really go off alone to another country. So for now, he'll explore Korea first. His aunt says spending a year in Korea will only delay his studies further, since he probably won't be going to school there. The protagonist says all he wants is to stay outside for a long time. He wants to feel the wind on his face. He thinks it'll do his mind some good. He tells his aunt he just wants to relax a little, and not to worry if he goes a while without calling. His aunt says she'll keep a room open for him, and whenever he wants, he can come to her house. He can do whatever he wants. He just has to call from time to time so she doesn't worry too much. The protagonist says he will, then hangs up. Elsewhere in the city, the white-haired guy and the blonde were still furious about the situation. 2 full days had passed since they sent word to have the protagonist picked up, and not a single message had come back. The white-haired one calls the blonde, asking what happened, since he was the one who hired that organization. The blonde says he's been calling them, but no one answers. The white-haired guy snaps, saying he can't even get someone to do a simple job and that it's pathetic incompetence. The blonde gets angry too and tells him not to call for a while. After hanging up, he's still fuming when his phone starts ringing. He answers and hears that Soo-hyun wants to see him. He asks where he needs to go, but he's told that before meeting him, he needs to bring something. When they meet, it turns out the thing he was supposed to bring, the thing Soo-hyun wanted, was the apartment photos and the protagonist's location. Sejong asks if he really lives in that rooftop room. He's annoyed there isn't even a proper photo of him. Still, they now plan to get rid of their own documents, so when they put the plan into action, they won't leave any trace. Then he hands everything to Soo-hyun so he can pass it to the special forces. He says that the last time they went after the protagonist, they were far too careless, but this time, they'll take every possible precaution. The look on his face shows all the rage he still carries from those 2 years in juvenile detention. The blonde seems unusually afraid of him. Apparently, Soo-hyun is the group's leader and intimidates everyone around him. He asks whether the white-haired guy sent that message saying he'd play with the protagonist first, and asks the blonde what that meant. But the blonde says he isn't really sure and knows nothing about it. Soo-hyun asks if he's certain, and he says yes. He'd never lied to him. One of the members reports that the protagonist's location has been confirmed and that the special forces will bring him there in about an hour. Soo-hyun smiles. Now he can finally get his revenge on the protagonist for sending him to juvenile detention for 2 years. With everyone gathered, they head out to wait at the protagonist's apartment. Meanwhile, 2 more men are sent there. Looks like he's about to get a couple more toys to play with. When they reach the rooftop, one tells his partner the target is only 18, but they still shouldn't hold back. Once there, they notice the place doesn't look right. His partner stares at the door and suddenly gets scared, saying there's some kind of wild beast inside. The bald guy asks what the hell he's talking about, wondering if he means a rabid dog or something. His partner says no, not even close. It's really a wild beast. The bald guy says something like that couldn't possibly live in the middle of the city, and that he's talking nonsense. Still, they continue with the mission and move in on the building, but before the bald guy can open the door, the protagonist punches it so hard it flies off its hinges. His partner still tries to hit him, and somehow even lands the punch, but it does absolutely nothing. Then the protagonist drives a clenched fist straight into him, flattening him into the floor too. The bald guy was still alive, at least for now. Back with Sejong and the others, he asks one of the guys why he didn't go with the other 2. The man says there was no need. Both the bald guy and the big one were pros, and their target was only 18. Then his phone starts ringing. He frowns when he sees the call is from the bald guy they sent out there. The moment he answers, one of his men is screaming. He recognizes the voice right away. It's Kenta, the big guy from the group, yelling through the phone. The protagonist asks where he is, but before Kenta can finish, the call is about to cut off. Realizing he won't get anything useful out of him, the protagonist decides to use the bald guy to lead him to where the others are gathered. The bald man says the place is 10 minutes from his apartment, but the protagonist says he can do it in 5 at most. With that, he gets into the car. Before that, though, he rips the roof off. He's so huge he can't even fit inside otherwise. Kenta is in the back seat, and they head straight for Sejong's location. The guy on the phone sounds panicked, and the others start asking what happened. He tells them to leave immediately. The mission has apparently failed. If they want to stay safe, they need to go straight home. Sejong can't believe they failed trying to grab a loser like the protagonist. The man snaps that there's no time to explain. They need to get somewhere safe now. He keeps repeating that everyone has to leave that place. Sejong asks if someone is coming, clearly unhappy about it, while the guy on the line sounds furious. But before anyone can do much, someone seems to have entered, and a loud scream echoes out. Outside, the protagonist has arrived, sword in hand. People on the street are filming him and taking pictures. He asks the bald man which room they're in, and the answer is the 8th floor. The crowd stares at his size and at the sword, thinking they're watching some kind of movie shoot. But one woman looks into the backseat of the car and spots Kenta, and the state he's in sends her into a panic. This isn't a movie at all, it's real. Up in the room, even the thugs are getting nervous. They have no idea what's happening or why all those screams are coming from outside. One of them says the building has 3 stairwells, so they should split up and run. Sejong says he doesn't even know where to go. But no matter where they head, someone could be waiting outside, or run into one of them on the stairs. So splitting up is their best shot. The blonde guy says he wants to go with him, insisting that man can definitely protect them. But Sejong says one of them should go downstairs and call the police. The girl says she's going with him and clings to his arm. He tells Suho to take the back stairs and tells the blonde guy to use the other stairwell. The hired man decides to go with Suho and the girl, since they're the clients and get priority when it comes to protection. In the end, the blonde guy is left on his own, while Suho heads off with the others. As they start going down the stairs, the protagonist is already climbing up. The only question is which group he'll find first. The blonde guy is coming down the stairs terrified, while Suho and his group descend until they reach a door and find the police on the other side. They're relieved to see them, thinking they've somehow made it out. The blonde guy isn't that lucky. Without realizing it, he's struck and instantly blacks out. When he opens his eyes, he can't even remember what happened. Then he sees the protagonist standing right in front of him. He wonders who this guy is, and beside him, the bald man, the hired one who gave them the information, is already finished. It's a pretty horrifying sight. The blonde guy immediately panics and stammers out that they can start now. He keeps asking who the man is. The protagonist can't believe it. Even after everything he did, this guy still doesn't recognize him, because he himself never forgot him. He remembers all too clearly everything that bastard did. Outside, the police are surrounding the building and the whole situation has blown up. From a window, the blonde guy still doesn't realize it, but the protagonist has taken him hostage. One of the officers below wonders who he is and why he's doing this. Sejong calls the blonde guy by name, Chang-soo. Chang-soo freezes, wondering how he knows his name and who the hell this man is. Then, looking him straight in the eye, the protagonist reveals it. He is Taeke Sejong, the same boy Chang-soo tormented and dragged through all that suffering. Desperation spreads across his face. Now he knows exactly who this is, and everything he did comes rushing back. Down below, the police hear the name and immediately order a search on him. Meanwhile, Chang-soo still can't process it. How could this monster possibly be Taeke Sejong? The protagonist says that 3 years ago, in front of Gwanghamun, 2 people, Tak Chang-soon and Go Yoon-jin, gave their lives in the flames. Those 2 were his parents. Everyone below knows that story. The moment they realize it, panic spreads. The man doing all this is that little boy who spent 9 months in a coma after losing his parents in a sacrifice the media turned into public tragedy. Then he pulls the sword from his back and plants it at his feet. He grabs the blonde by the neck, and the kid immediately starts to panic. He realizes his hands are chained, and starts calling for his mother, then his father, which only infuriates the protagonist even more, since he was the one who tore him away from them. He says the boy's parents had already paid with their lives for drawing that kind of attention, but from that day on, he's going to make all of them pay with their lives for everything they put him through. While he says that, outside, everything is being broadcast live. The news reports that someone is being held hostage in a building near the station, and both SWAT and the police have already arrived. People wonder if this really is that couple's son, and even though 3 years have passed, he still should have been a minor. But judging by his appearance, he doesn't look like a teenager at all. All around them, things were turning into complete chaos, with every kind of police unit on site. Down below, they ask for the boy's full file and order a deep investigation into everything that happened to him. They also confirm that the blonde kid is the son of the president of Aegis Security, and he doesn't like where any of this is heading. Aegis, after all, is the biggest home security company in Korea, and the boy is also one of the defendants tied to that case from 3 years ago. He believes that if the blonde really was involved, and if the man with the sword is truly Taeke Sejong, then that kid is in serious danger. He keeps trying to negotiate with the protagonist, asking what his demands are, but Taeke Sejong makes it clear. There will be no negotiation. The officer keeps begging him to say what he wants, while helicopters circle above the building. The protagonist repeats that there will be no negotiation. He only has an announcement to make. Then he starts naming every person involved. The 8 people who did this to him. One by one, he lists them, including Kim Jong-soo, who's right beside him. He declares that all of them will die by his own hands. Their parents will die too, along with the rest of their families, brothers and sisters included. Every last one of them will fall by the protagonist's hand. And that was the announcement he made to the entire world. He says that even if they call the police or the army, nothing will stop him from doing what he wants, and they will pay for everything they did to him. No one will be able to stop him. The blonde makes one last attempt, which honestly is incredibly stupid. He says something terrible will happen to the protagonist if he kills him, because his father is a very important man. But gripping that sword, the protagonist is so furious, he almost seems to be asking whether the kid still thinks he's that same idiot from school, still a coward, no matter how big he's gotten. But the only thing written across the protagonist's face is rage. Looking straight into the cameras, he tells everyone to watch closely. This is nothing less than a declaration of war. Then with his sword, he sends the kid's head flying. That scene left everyone silent and stunned. Something shocking had happened that afternoon. Sejong was about to be etched into Korean history forever. Anyway, continuing, Chang-soo's father was watching the whole thing on his tablet. At that moment, he was consumed by rage, repeating over and over how dare he do that to his son. From his face alone, you could tell the man was deeply shaken. The chairman, who was also Sun Jung's father, was watching too, and even he looked stunned. He picks up the phone and immediately asks to be connected to the police commissioner. The man who answers is Lee Bok, and the chairman tells him that they must immediately give the order to shoot the protagonist. Back at the building, the officer below is still trying to process what just happened. Then his phone rings, and when he checks it, he sees that authorization to fire has been granted. They're to do it now. One sniper is already in position, with more stationed on the other side. Once everyone is ready, the protagonist watches it all, carefully tracking them with his eyes. Then one of them pulls the trigger, certain he's just hit the protagonist in the head. He immediately reports that the target has been eliminated. But when he looks closer, he realizes the shot struck the sword instead. The protagonist reflected it. Down below, the officer gets new orders. They're to fire for real, so he passes the command to everyone, and a storm of gunfire erupts. But the protagonist is no longer on the building. With a huge leap, he jumps far away. As they follow his movement, he slides down using a pole, skimming across the tops of cars, then lands on the ground with ease. Spotting a nearby police car, he hurls it back at them. causing a massive explosion. The officer is still trying to understand what just happened, but when he looks into the flames, the protagonist emerges from inside, and he clearly isn't there to talk. The officer wonders what that thing even is, because it doesn't seem human at all. He orders his men to get ready to engage him and gives them clearance to fire. But before the shooting starts, the protagonist jumps upward and vanishes from their sight. Then, moving at blinding speed, he suddenly appears right behind them and takes down both shooters. The officer keeps barking orders, telling everyone to use everything they've got. One sniper manages to get a clear view of the protagonist and fires, but before the bullet can reach his face, the protagonist deflects it with his sword. The officer keeps yelling for them to stop him somehow, to use every weapon they have, so everyone opens fire at once, yet the protagonist seems to reflect every shot. Then he swings his sword and blasts everything away, carving open a huge path and wiping out everyone in front of him. The reporters on site can't believe what they're seeing is real, and after clearing the way, the protagonist lets out a deafening scream. Meanwhile, at a hospital, Soo Ryun and Soo Jung look terrified as they watch him. The girl is in full panic, and the guy is literally trembling. The protagonist's words keep pounding in his head. Back at the scene, the protagonist ultimately escapes them all, but where everything happened, a huge fire breaks out, and the hostages are called in. While the injured are being treated, the officer in charge interrogates a man named Gu Gyung. Apparently, at one point, the protagonist questioned this guy and asked where the hostages had gone. Those hostages were Soo Ryun and Soo Jung, and they had been taken to the hospital. The man gave the protagonist their location. He didn't want to die. When the officer hears that, he's furious, because this is a massive problem. It basically puts their lives in danger, so he punches the guy straight in the face. Everything is spiraling out of control for him, and the protagonist is already heading towards Xinjin Hospital, the exact place where Soo Ryun and Soo Jung are hiding and being treated. He quickly grabs his phone and calls one of his men, warning him that the protagonist is heading straight for the hospital and that all special forces need to move there now. Meanwhile, at that same hospital, Soo Ryun and Soo Jung are still terrified, and outside, the protagonist has already reached the area. On TV, a reporter says the suspect behind all of this has escaped the scene, confirming that the protagonist killed Shang-Su and that his current whereabouts are unknown. Hearing all this, Soo Ryun is overwhelmed with rage and can't hold it in. Then the woman from earlier enters through the door, the same one tied to the Secret Service. She comes in with several men, apparently there to get them out. They lift the girl into their arms, since she's so terrified she can barely move, and decide it's time to flee. But as they're leaving, the protagonist is already waiting for them. Taking a step forward, he heads into the hospital. The officer is still doing everything he can to move special forces to the location. That information reaches the Secret Service, which immediately learns he's coming right for them. But before they can do anything, the protagonist appears behind them, shattering the glass. Through the smoke, he emerges from inside, and now, for the first time in a long time, he is face to face with Soo Ryun. But Soo Ryun is quickly dragged away by that girl, who tells him they need to run to the elevator immediately. The protagonist asks where he thinks he's going, when his parents suffered through all of that because of the influence of their families. Then he screams out his name. The girl tells everyone to attack him. They need to hold him off as fast as possible. But those guys never stood a chance. The protagonist beats them all down without slowing. Soo Ryun and the other three make it to the elevator and slam the buttons, trying desperately to get it moving. Before the doors can close, one of the men reaches them in terrible shape, begging for help. But in the blink of an eye, he's yanked away, and through the gap in the doors, they catch sight of the protagonist's body. All of them are horrified, wondering if that thing is even human. Soo Ryun realizes the elevator is going down, which is a huge problem. They're supposed to escape by helicopter, so they should be heading to the roof. Then above them, they sense something incredibly heavy moving up. When they look up, the protagonist is there with his sword. They realize he's probably about to do something, and one of them orders everyone to duck immediately. With one hand, the protagonist drives his sword through the ceiling. The girl tells them that as soon as the elevator opens, they all need to run without looking back. Meanwhile, the protagonist keeps stabbing through the ceiling again and again, though luckily none of them are hit. But when they finally make a run for it, one of them isn't so lucky and gets left behind. It's the same man carrying the girl, and she watches it happen right in front of her. Just in time, he threw her body aside. Then the protagonist tore through the roof. He dropped straight into the elevator, and a massive cloud of smoke filled the cabin. As everyone struggled back to their feet, there he was, Takeshi Young, standing right in front of them. He demanded to know where they thought they were going. In his mind, he was calling out to Soo Ryun and Soo Jung, and his face showed just how long he'd been waiting for this moment. But to his surprise, a car came barreling in at full speed. Even with how overpowered the protagonist was, he didn't notice it in time and got hit. He didn't seem hurt, but the impact still sent his body flying. And inside that car was none other than Professor Young, a man who had appeared before. He shouted for everyone to get in the car right now. But the protagonist was already fine. He'd used his sword to absorb the impact. The boys and that woman piled into the car, and the professor told them to leave immediately. His friend urged him to get in too so they could all escape together, but he insisted they go now. So they started the car and drove off. Now face to face with the protagonist, Takeshi Young simply ignored him and started walking toward the car. The professor opened fire at him repeatedly, but it clearly had no effect. He wondered where a monster like that had even come from. But if the protagonist wanted the car, he'd have to go through him first. Of course, that was no challenge at all. The protagonist wiped the guy out in milliseconds. Meanwhile, in the middle of the road, the others kept fleeing, with several cars already escorting them. They kept asking if anyone could see him, but there was still no sign of the maniac. Then someone on the phone told the girl he was less than a minute away and that they needed to reach the bridge where a helicopter was waiting. She passed that on to her friend and told him to floor it. Still, they clearly weren't moving fast enough. The protagonist was already right on their tail. With one huge leap, he landed on top of one of the cars, and they immediately realized he was already close. By then, they were almost at the rendezvous point, and the girl ordered them to use any method possible to stop him. A crate full of weapons was brought out, including grenade launchers, and without hesitating, the man started firing. He even cracked a smile. After all, no normal person could survive a grenade launcher, so he thought they'd gotten him. But to his shock, the protagonist leaped onto the hood of his car. Sujong let out a desperate scream, and with his bare hands, he ripped the top right off it. At that point, it looked like the end of the line for everyone inside. The protagonist raised his sword, ready to strike, but then the car slammed into the side of the bridge, and with his attack, he reduced the impact. Behind him, though, several men with rocket launchers were already in position. Multiple grenades were launched in his direction, and even from his expression, this didn't look very good. A huge cloud of smoke exploded outward, and more men prepared to fire. Then the protagonist burst out of the smoke, leaping up to the bridge's roof and hanging there. As he stared down at the police, one of them ordered everyone to open fire, but he dodged everything, and even deflected the shots, so it was all useless. A moment later, the protagonist was back on the ground. He warned them that if they valued their lives, the smartest thing they could do was leave. And if they stayed in his way, every one of them would die by his own hand. But the idiots ignored him and kept trying to shoot. Behind them, the helicopter meant to take Suryo and Sujung had arrived, so they rushed toward it. The protagonist watched the whole thing, his sword aimed straight at the helicopter. He had no intention of letting them escape. He knew that if he struck it, everyone there would die. But those two didn't deserve to go out like that. They'd barely even feel any suffering, so he decided the best move was to wait, to let despair sink deep into their minds, until one day they would meet him again. Meanwhile, at the presidential palace, several powerful figures had gathered with the president. On a giant screen, they watched everything unfolding across the city. One of them said the suspect was Takeshi Yong, 18 years old, last seen at Yongdong Bridge. They were still investigating him, but 3 years earlier, he had been one of the victims in the juvenile incident that drew massive media attention. His parents had also become a public focus, after sacrificing themselves in front of Gwanghwamun. One of them wondered where Takeshi Yong thought he was heading now. The woman said she had no idea yet, but the investigation would continue. She added that, in a situation like this, it made no sense for the president to skip the meeting, though she said he was trying to find a solution by other means. At Blue Wing Studio, more influential people were watching everything unfold too, including the part where the protagonist said all their names and warned that every one of them would die by his own hand, including their parents and even their families. The key point was that inside Blue Wing were some very interesting people. One of them was the chairman of the Shin Shin group and Soo Hyun's father. They believed the best move was to block everything related to that video and any similar searches. The chairman said he'd do everything he could to keep the video from the public. Also at the table was the president of Blue Wing Studio, Young Suk's mother, the white-haired one. She said blocking everything would be difficult. Even the green-haired girl's father was there. He was the chairman of Goldfield, the country's biggest news portal. Soo Hyun's father said they needed to stabilize the situation and find a way to neutralize the protagonist. Namji's father, another parent from that group of 8, was also at the table. It was clear all those punks' fathers were there, and every one of them belonged to powerful families. One of them pointed out that the protagonist didn't even flinch in front of guns, and asked how they were supposed to deal with someone like that. Another argued that if he were truly bulletproof, he would just let himself be hit. He wouldn't dodge or run. So they believed all of this was really just police incompetence, and that if they used mercenaries or soldiers and concentrated enough firepower, he would definitely be killed. But when he said that, the room fell completely silent. No one knew if that would actually work. What they'd seen was beyond human. The chairman declared he could get any kind of people to deal with him, but the white-haired boy's mother asked who they thought he'd target first. Meanwhile, at Gongmu Cemetery, the protagonist headed there, and the worker on duty was already panicking. That was the fugitive everyone was after. He told his coworker to call the police immediately. Ignoring him, the protagonist walked to a grave, and it belonged to none other than his parents. He apologized to them, saying he should have come there first before leaving home, and apologized for being late. At that moment, Taesung couldn't hold back his tears. Calling for his mother and father, he said he missed them terribly. With a hand on the gravestone, he asked them not to worry. He knew exactly what they were doing. He told them to just rest and watch. By then, the police had already surrounded the cemetery, but without breaking his train of thought, the protagonist said he would forgive none of them, and not a single one would be left alive. They would also learn despair and feel the same pain he had felt. He knew no one, not even the country, had listened to his parents, so he wouldn't listen to anyone anymore either. All of them would know the pain he felt. the military ordered him to surrender, but the protagonist said that country would learn what it meant to scream and have no one hear you, and anyone who had sinned against him would be punished. By then, helicopters had already surrounded the area, and from above they gave the order to open fire. Even after the barrage, the officer kept ordering the protagonist to drop his sword, warning that any movement would be treated as a threat. But before he could finish his sentence, the protagonist struck the helicopter with his sword, triggering an explosion. He kept saying that in a sacred place like this, where his parents rested, they were making a mess. What the hell were they thinking? As the helicopter fell, the officer couldn't believe what he was seeing, but then a huge explosion caught him off guard. It was a tank, and apparently several more were arriving. Yet when the smoke cleared, the protagonist was still fine, though his clothes had been torn. With a huge leap, he ran toward where the helicopter had crashed and retrieved his sword. Dropping into a sprinting stance, he clenched it in his mouth. The officer ordered everyone to open fire, and at that same moment, the protagonist charged in, cutting through everyone. The officer still couldn't process what had happened. The protagonist had basically wiped the place clean. Then one of their phones received a call, and the new order was to capture him alive, no matter what. He could become a major asset for Korea. The guy still wondered how they were supposed to take the protagonist alive when they couldn't even hit him. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, some shady figures were talking. They said they had some extremely powerful equipment, and if they used it, anyone nearby, including witnesses, would never forget it. Apparently, they were mercenaries hired by the Blue Wing organization. The guy says those weapons are absolutely necessary. After all, one of them watched his own son's head get blown off, and anyone would lose their mind after seeing that. So they need to use everything they have and turn the city into total chaos. Once the mission is over, they'll be paid 20 times what ordinary mercenaries were promised. He says the rage of losing his son is driving him to start a full-scale war in the city. At the same time, officials from several countries were meeting to discuss how to capture him, but it didn't look like taking him alive was even realistic. After reviewing everything that happened, even the deployment of tanks, they realized he had escaped, and even the country's strongest unit was urgently calling for reinforcements. Still, one of them says those efforts are only on hold, and will resume soon. They also learned that an organization had been assigned to hunt the protagonist, the same one hired back at the beginning, and they were partly responsible for triggering this war. Now they want a report from them, and an explanation for why they attacked the protagonist in the first place. Meanwhile, back at the cemetery, as he stared into the distance, he pictured two parents and a happy child. Only in his mind, of course. That memory hit him hard, reminding him of what happened to his parents. Elsewhere, at the white-haired man's house, he was furious with Shang-Su, saying the guy had been useless even when it came time to die. He knows he'll probably be the next target when his phone suddenly rings. It's none other than the green-haired girl, wondering why he took so long to answer. He says he only picked up because it was her. Everything outside is complete chaos. She tells him she called because she was worried about him, and apparently she already knew the white-haired man had told Shang-Su to go after the protagonist some time ago. He asks how she found that out, and she says the blonde guy told her everything. He never hid anything from her. That makes the white-haired man even more pissed at him, still cursing the idiot. The white-haired man says she can tell everyone for all he cares. He'll probably be dead himself any moment now. She tells him not to talk like that because she has a plan. She thinks there's a way to stop all this, and the white-haired man asks what she's talking about. Is there really a way to stop him? She asks if he'd forgotten that day, the day they did that to him. Apparently, the protagonist had been protecting someone. At that moment, the white-haired man remembers too, and the two of them almost laugh at the absurdity of it. They recall how, while he was lying on the ground, he kept saying he would take all the punishment in that person's place. In the end, that whole incident only happened because the protagonist was trying to protect a girl, and they figure the best way to stop him is to take her hostage. Anyway, moving on, after everything that happened at the cemetery, the protagonist went into a forest to be alone for a while. But at the same time, special forces had already tracked him down, and the soldiers in this operation were part of the same group hired by the blonde-haired guy's father. The apparent organization sat in his car looking very pleased, promising the protagonist he'd soon see what AESGIS security could really do. He orders his men to move in, and once they do, open fire. After a massive explosion, they start celebrating, convinced they finally got rid of him. But then he appears right behind them, and with his sword sends everyone to their deaths. Through the phone and his earpiece, the man in the car hears it all happen. Then he checks the internet and sees that chaos has spread everywhere. His whole plan is collapsing, and the disbelief is written all over his face. Once again, the protagonist escapes unharmed, and to make things worse, he finds their car. He sends it flying off the road, likely killing both men inside. News of the case keeps spreading around the world, and roads, streets, and even borders are being shut down to stop the protagonist from escaping. Experts around the world begin offering their theories on what's happening. They question why the protagonist is doing all this. After all, 3 years had passed since what happened to his parents, so they wonder whether this is just revenge or the result of severe psychological damage. Some even describe the protagonist as a complete psychopath. In their view, nothing justified what he was doing, not even what happened to his parents. If he really wanted to be a better person, they say, he should have sought a legal solution or turned to people close to him for help. And with all this happening, with even the police unable to contain him, they start discussing the possibility of putting equipment in civilians' hands so they can protect themselves. Out on the street, two men are talking, and one shows the other how the internet is reacting to everything. Among the flood of messages, it's clear that some people are siding with the protagonist, even blaming themselves, because they didn't listen when he needed them most. They believe that failure is what led to all of this. In that same chat, people wonder whether that scene between the protagonist and the blonde-haired guy was real or just fake. They pass around links, watch the footage, and keep asking how something like that could even be possible. One of them jokes that he should invite the guy to his gaming group, showing just how unhinged the internet had become. In other investigation centers, people ask how things are progressing, and teams start digging through every part of the protagonist's life, including all the neighbors he had any contact with. One of them asks whether there was anything about him online at all, but even after breaking into every database they could access, they found nothing. The man says someone his age should be living online, and probably should have left some clue about what he was planning. The woman replies that even after extensive searches, they couldn't find a single file. Not from any point in the 3 years since he came out of his coma. He never even created an account, and if he did, it had already been deleted. Basically, there was no trace of him anywhere on the internet. The man reports that the special forces sent to the cemetery were completely wiped out, and the whole thing still feels unreal. They aren't fully sure what happened there, so they can't say with certainty that the unit was totally destroyed. Still, they've lost contact with everyone who was on site. The man can barely believe a special force of that scale could have been crushed. With all this going on, multiple organizations start investigating each other before sending any reinforcements, because after seeing what happened to the troops, they're afraid of just throwing more soldiers away. One of the analysts is outraged, asking how a single person could cause this much damage, and with all their resources, why they still can't stop him. Then every phone in the room starts ringing. The call reports that another organization has entered the operation and is now interfering with theirs. In another investigation department, two men are talking. One says a woman named Go Ryujin has been found in the United States, and apparently she's Takise-young's maternal aunt. Basically, she married an American man and moved there, liked the country, and decided to stay. He asks whether the other man is taking the steps he requested. He orders everyone standing by there to head to her house immediately and take her in so they can somehow use her to stop the protagonist. His partner confirms he'll do it, adding that she should return to Korea willingly. But if she doesn't, they'll have to find a way to force it. Meanwhile, in Los Angeles, California, at the protagonist's aunt's house, several men knock on her door, claiming they're from the Korean embassy. As she approaches, she asks what they need, and they immediately start trying to force the door open. She asks what they're doing and says their behavior is incredibly rude. The man tells her to please open the door. They're from the embassy. Standing with her husband and son, she asks what they want. He says they'd like to speak inside the house, but she hesitates, unsure whether she should open the door. Then the man says what he has to say concerns her nephew. He asks if Takase-young really is her nephew, and she confirms it. Immediately she asks whether something happened to her Takase-young. The man says he's gotten himself into a huge amount of trouble, and if she opens the door, he can explain, so she does. But behind those men, a massive unit is already in position, ordering her to stay still. One of the men steps forward and confirms her name, while she stands there, clearly shaken. This isn't exactly an everyday visit. On the other side of the world, Soo Ryun and Soo Ho are walking together when Soo Ryun gets a call on his phone. It's another one of those 8 guys, and from his voice, it's obvious he's terrified. Soo Ryun asks why he's calling. The guy asks if he's okay and whether he's been hurt. Soo Ryun tells him to worry about himself and not call without a reason. He says they have police protection at the house, but the boy keeps asking if he's really okay, in a very strange tone. It sounds like he's scared out of his mind. He again asks whether there are a lot of guards around him and whether even SWAT might be there with him. Soo Ryun finds the whole thing suspicious, but says yes, he's heavily protected. He says that if Takase-young tries to attack him, he'll only end up badly hurt. The boy still acts strangely, asking if he's somewhere safe. Soo Ryun says he's not at home. He's in Yongsan, at a US base in Korea, a maximum security location. So Soo Ryun says that no matter how hard Takase-young tries, he won't get to him. No one gets in there and walks back out alive. The guy on the phone keeps acting odd and says that place does sound much safer. Soo Ryun keeps finding the whole thing suspicious and reminds him that nobody can enter without authorization. The boy sounds even shakier on the phone, and Soo Ryun finally hangs up, saying they've already talked too much. The moment he ends the call, we find out why he was so terrified. Standing right in front of him is none other than our protagonist. The boy begs him to forgive him, and his voice makes it obvious he's shaking. The room is a mess. It's clear a lot happened there, and plenty of police officers had already been taken out. Crying, the boy says he did everything he was told, and even found Soo Ryun's location. He's at a US base in Yongsan. He says Soo Ryun has too much power, and going after him would only backfire. He insists he did all of this because Soo Ryun forced him, then begs for his life and asks forgiveness for everything. He pleads for one more chance from the protagonist, but staring straight into his eyes, the protagonist calls him by his name, Hyun. Takase-young says that when he was the one begging for his life, none of them showed mercy. When he was lying there on the ground, what did Hyun do for him? Did he even try to help? Then he raises his sword and looking him in the eye says, "This is his end." May God receive him. And just like that, the poor guy was finished. Another one of the 8 was gone. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Professor Young is in critical condition. Honestly, it's a miracle he's still alive. The man is completely wrecked, but he's still breathing. A younger guy updates the old man on his condition, saying the whole situation is a disaster. He also realizes that even the executive director had abandoned the training hall. After seeing everything unfold, the man simply bailed. The old man says that's fine. He more or less expected it. People would get scared and turn their backs. Then his phone rings, and it's Soo-hyun's father. After a while, the two begin talking. He says all these events must have left the old man deeply troubled, but the old man says he doesn't want to discuss his own problems first. Ever since Professor Young was hurt, he's been in bad shape. After all, the professor had tried to protect his unworthy son. The old man says that's all right. His job was to protect others. Soo-hyun's father keeps blaming himself, since he was the one who put him in that role. The professor had only reluctantly accepted the task of protecting his family, and now he was in critical condition, all because of his stubborn son. But the old man says the professor chose his own actions. No one forced him, so no one else is to blame. It was simply bad luck. If someone takes on the duty of protecting another person, they have to be ready to die for them. That's what being a bodyguard means. Soo-hyun's father apologizes sincerely, but the old man says he'll set that aside and talk about the real problem. From the news, he saw that the protagonist still hadn't been captured and asks what the next move will be. Seungri's father tells him not to worry. He's already mobilized a large number of soldiers, and the protagonist will be neutralized soon. The old man tells him to do his best, because he won't be sitting still either. He says it's been 20 years since he last felt this kind of fear before facing a major enemy. That enemy is incredibly powerful, and maybe he's the only one who can truly stand up to the protagonist. So the old man orders them to summon him. His name is Jang Yu. His assistant asks if he really intends to call in the top leader of the Society of Purity. The old man's silence is answer enough. Maybe this will be the protagonist's next great enemy. And at the Blue House, the president asks for a full report on what's happening and on the life of Taiki Seungri. On the call, the other man says that the son of Congressman Nam Ki-jung from the finance department was found already dead. The president is visibly shaken by the news, but the man says they're currently investigating the scene, along with 2 more police divisions and a detachment of soldiers who had been sent to protect the city. All of them had been wiped out. The president keeps repeating that it's impossible, and asks if they know the protagonist's current location. The man says he's heading towards Sejong Avenue, and multiple units are following him. But then the president tells him to listen very carefully. No matter where Taiki Seungri wants to go, they are to let him go and not block his way. The man on the other end can hardly believe what he's hearing, but the president says there must be no press there, not even reporters, and if anyone is caught filming, they should be taken into custody. The man still doesn't understand what he's being told, but the president repeats that they must let him move freely, and he'll take full responsibility. After all, the presidential inauguration is in 2 days, counting from now. Until then, no one can learn how bad things really are in the country, because that could damage the start of his term. The man says that even if they do that, it's not like no one will ever find out. But the president insists they suppress every piece of news tied to the case, hide the protagonist's movements as much as possible, and control the internet. You can tell from his face he isn't joking, and all the other man can say is that he'll do as ordered. Meanwhile, out on the street, Tae-sung walks calmly with his sword, and everyone around him runs from him. The guy is being hunted across all of Korea. While waiting for the bus, he clears out the entire stop. Everyone's terrified, even though he has no intention of hurting them. As the bus drives by, he reaches out to stop it and laments not having a bus card. The driver is just following his route, but the moment he sees the protagonist, he panics. This is the wanted man everyone is looking for. Instead of stopping, he keeps going. There's no way he's letting someone like that onto his bus. But the protagonist grabs the rear of the vehicle with one hand and stops it effortlessly. At that point, the driver is in total despair, but the protagonist calmly tells the old man that he'll be getting on. Meanwhile, the president is talking to Soo-hyun's father and asks how things are going. The man says he sent his son to the US base, and the president wonders how he hadn't thought of that. He says that even for someone from the Shinjin group, sending him there couldn't have been easy, and asks how he managed it with full security in place. The man says all he did was hide him among some soldiers, and it was actually pretty easy. The president is still confused, since even the army had been mobilized, and they shouldn't have let something like that slide so easily. But Soo-hyun's father says that's where it gets good. They can even use the military as bait. If the protagonist shows up, they'll be ready to launch a bigger attack. The president is impressed by how solid his plans are, and the man says he always has another plan ready if one fails. The president says he's blocked all information related to the case because he doesn't want it hurting the start of his presidency. Then he decides to send Soo-jung to the US base as well. It's probably the safest place right now, though with a hand to his face, he still wonders if it really is safe. The man says it's a US base. If something happens there, who would even know? And even if something does happen, he already has a helicopter ready to escape anywhere else. The president keeps saying how impressive he is. He planned everything ahead. Back to the protagonist. He's still on the bus with the driver, who's terrified. But looking ahead, the protagonist notices the police aren't blocking traffic, letting him pass without trouble. The driver looks at the police and wonders what they're doing. Taek Se-jung is inside his bus, and they're doing absolutely nothing to stop him. Of course, that's only in his head. After all, the protagonist is right beside him. Taek Se-jung wonders if they know where he wants to go, or if they're leading him somewhere they've already prepared. Still, he decides it doesn't matter. Whatever they try against him, they'll regret it. He knows that anyone protecting those eight is no different from them, and all of them will be punished. Meanwhile, at the US base, Se-jung has arrived together with that woman. Then we get a flashback of her speaking with the girl's father. He says taking her there won't be easy, but asks them to trust her. And with that, the two women move closer. Meanwhile, some of the higher-ups, including one of the eight, were discussing the situation, especially how the police weren't trying to stop him and were actually clearing the way. They believed the protagonist was heading for Mapo Bridge, but one of them said they shouldn't interfere. Then his phone rang. The voice on the other end told them to stop him immediately, which made no sense. The standing order had been to let him move however he wanted, but apparently that order had changed, and now they were being told to stop him at once. The guy asked what was going on. Had Taek Se-jung just entered the American military base? He couldn't understand what he was hearing or how they could possibly have let Taek Se-jung inside. But the man on the phone, clearly shaken, said that wasn't exactly what happened. The protagonist had simply smashed through the wall and forced his way in. He couldn't believe it. That wall was supposed to be extremely tough, and yet right in front of them, the protagonist was already inside. Once in, he shouted Soo-hyun's name. With every passing minute, he was getting closer to finding him and making him pay for everything he'd done. His timing couldn't have been more perfect because Soo-jung was there too. In other words, he was about to find both of them right in front of him. Anyway, the special forces on base mobilized immediately. Since it was a US base, the soldiers shouted in English, ordering him to put his hands up and surrender. The protagonist told them there was someone in that place he was looking for, but the soldiers ignored him and kept demanding that he surrender. He said the people he wanted were Soo-hyun and Soo-ho, but no one listened. That was when he finally lost his patience. He leaped high into the air and told himself they were all the same, protecting people who didn't deserve protection. After that, all that was left was for them to get beaten down by him. Sword in hand, he tore through everyone in sight. Even tanks were deployed to stop him, and of course, it was useless. After a long fight, with the protagonist wiping out wave after wave, they reported the situation to the command center of the facility. One of the men said this was insane, far beyond anything they'd seen on YouTube. The woman there wondered how this was even possible, and another man said even their elite soldiers had been completely crushed in under a minute. She added that even their combat android would be pointless against him, since it was still an unfinished prototype and probably wouldn't be fully realized for another 20 years, so they couldn't use it. One of the men asked whether they had any similar enhancement system, something that could turn a soldier into a being with that kind of strength. The woman said they did have drugs and procedures that could make someone superhuman, but even in the best-case scenario, the improvement would only be around 30%, nowhere near enough to deal with the protagonist. A heavy silence fell over the room. Then someone spoke up, apparently the scientist in charge of the facility. She seemed interested in going to Korea, and asked if anyone wanted to go with her. She also told the commander to order his soldiers to stop attacking. She had become very interested in the protagonist's body and thought killing him would be a huge waste. What she really wanted was to capture him and bring him into the US base so they could study him. Meanwhile, back at the base, the protagonist was getting frustrated. There seemed to be no end to them, and the more people he beat down, the more showed up. He wondered when it would finally stop, until suddenly a new order came through. The soldiers were told to stop engaging the protagonist and open a path for him. Taek-sung wondered what that meant and why they were letting him through. Meanwhile, the Korean president learned that the protagonist was inside the American base, and one of his men explained that even though they had personnel nearby, they still hadn't been able to stop him from getting inside. At the same time, the young Special Forces woman received orders to leave immediately. She was in the same room with Soo-hyun, Soo-ho, and Soo-jung, all together. The message said she had to get out of there right away, but the call cut off before it could finish. When she checked her friend's phone, she realized the signal in that area had gone dead. She started to realize something was wrong. Something was probably coming. Back to the protagonist, he still couldn't figure out why they had suddenly retreated like that. The soldiers had basically stopped trying to do anything to him. He didn't care, and kept moving forward, trying to get inside and reach those bastards. He made it clear, if they tried anything, they'd end up dead. Back in the room, Soo-jung said that before coming to the base, she had spoken with Soo-ri, and apparently he said there was a foolproof plan to stop Taek Se-jung for good. Soo-ri asked what plan that was, and Soo-jung said the white-haired man claimed it would make the protagonist kneel before them and come crawling back like a lamb. Soo-ri said that if she meant his relative, basically the protagonist's aunt, he had already sent someone after her. But Soo-jung said she wasn't stupid and had already expected that. She'd even told her father about the relative. The two still looked confused about what the plan actually was, and while they kept talking, the Special Forces agent could only feel disgust listening to them. Their whole conversation was twisted. Soo-ri said he was thirsty and asked someone to get him some water from the car. Soo-jung asked him to bring her some too, and he agreed and went to get it. Then the girl approached Soo-jung and suggested they go back to her room. Soo-jung asked why all of a sudden, why should she go back to her room when she wanted to stay there with Soo-ri, but the agent wasn't playing around and gripped her shoulder. Leaning close, she said she had a bad feeling and told her to follow immediately. As soon as they stepped out, she started dragging the "Girl away," and a loud noise suddenly echoed behind them. The agent told her to run, now. In Soo-hyun's room, several men had just thrown open the door, and standing before him was the protagonist, who had already broken in. In his hands was Soo-hyun's body, apparently already dead. Seeing what was happening, his friend Soo-hyun panicked, and the protagonist tossed the body aside so he could see its condition. At that moment, he tried to crawl toward the door to escape, and he almost made it. The protagonist swung his sword and struck one of the nearby guards. Others jumped in front of him and tried to fight back, but as expected, it was hopeless, even with the huge explosion that followed. On the way there, Soo-hyun's father was racing over in his car. He already knew the base had been breached and was clearly worried about his son. He was also completely in the dark, since the base's signal had been cut and he couldn't get any information. But on the road, he finally picked up a signal and called one of his men. They said no one was being allowed into the base. Even after mentioning someone important, in this case Colonel Kessler, they had still been stopped at the gate and denied entry. That only made Soo-hyun's father even more furious. Back to Soo-hyun, he was running, while behind him the protagonist smashed through everything in his path. In his head, Soo-hyun kept calling for Soo-jung. But when he opened the door, he found the room completely empty. The cleanest place of all. She had left him behind and fled. He couldn't believe she had the nerve to do that to him, and when he looked back, he saw every guard had already been wiped out. Now he was face to face with the protagonist. He quickly stumbled and dropped to the floor. With an intimidating stare, the protagonist called his name and said he understood why he had to do this to him, repeating the same words over and over. Then the story flashes back to 3 years earlier. The protagonist was casually leaving his classroom with some papers in his hand, and that girl was beside him. For no real reason, Soo-hyun looked furious at both of them. He clearly wanted to beat the protagonist up. A classic bully. More than once, the protagonist was attacked by Soo-hyun's group. Back in the present, Soo-hyun says the protagonist can do whatever he wants. Go ahead. He keeps saying nothing can stop him from trying. But with a disturbing smile, the protagonist tells him not to complain if he really does. Soo-hyun makes one last desperate move, saying that if anything happens to him, his aunt will die too, and then spits out a few final idiotic words. He says that's just how the world works, and nothing gets out untouched. That only makes the protagonist even angrier, and to make it worse, a voice over the loudspeaker announces that his aunt was living in America, and whatever happened here could put her safety at risk. Soo-hyun smiles, because even now, his father still hadn't abandoned him. Smirking, he kept taunting the protagonist, telling him to go ahead and do it. But the plan backfired. Over that same loudspeaker, the soldier outside finished what he was saying. If Soo-hyun's aunt was in danger, the US government had already taken measures to keep her completely safe from any threat. They'd even evacuated her to a protected location. Soo-hyun's smile vanished. Now he was completely at the protagonist's mercy, wondering what would happen next. Back in the United States, that scientist showed a clear interest in the protagonist. She was pleased with everything unfolding, saying that using relatives as leverage was a very basic trick, and an easy one to counter. Then she's told that one of the evacuees from that building was the president's daughter. They were requesting a helicopter to get her out safely. She wanted to keep the operation under control, but if anything happened to the president's daughter, it could cause serious trouble, so for now she agreed it was best to send the helicopter and get her out first. They could decide the rest later, with cooler heads. So she gives the order, send the helicopter and extract the girl. After her subordinate leaves, her interest in the protagonist becomes even more obvious, and she admits she really wants to see him. Back at the building, at the US base, Soo-hyun had already been badly hurt. He was crawling across the floor, because with his sword, the protagonist had cut off what he used to stay on his feet. Looking down at him, Soo-hyun still calls his name, asking why he did it. He replies that he was trying to finish this quickly. Maybe he wouldn't even feel much pain. But after what Soo-hyun had tried to do to him, he knew it would always end like this. He goes on, saying Soo-hyun was never the type to get scared and reflect on his mistakes. He'd always been stubborn, with an ego through the roof. So after everything he'd done, the protagonist had prepared something special just for this occasion. Something that would consume him slowly. This would be his goodbye. A massive flame rises along his sword. The same flame that appeared above the rooftop a long time ago. Then he turns it towards Soo-hyun's body, and at that point, you can imagine what happened. The internet was going insane, saying he was inside a US base. Everything was chaos around the world, and some people still thought it might all be fake, because in modern times, not everyone is ready to believe in superpowers. Back at the base, Soo-hyun's father arrives and orders everyone to move aside. He wants in, but even he's stopped at the entrance. The guy is furious, veins bulging, yelling that they clearly have no idea who he is, and if they don't move, they'll regret it. Meanwhile, Soo-hyun was now feeling firsthand what the protagonist's parents had suffered. I can't describe that scene in detail, but you can probably picture it. He was meeting an end very similar to the one the protagonist's parents faced. Takeshi Hong says that maybe now, he can finally feel at least a fraction of the agony his parents went through. Back to Soo-hyun's father. He keeps trying to force his way inside, but the guard tells him the orders came from the very top, so there's nothing he can do. Even so, the man gets slapped by Soo-hyun's father. Then he drops the act and speaks seriously. He says he knows how these things work. No one gains anything by defying him. So if even he isn't being allowed in, then something extremely serious must be happening. If he tried to push further, he'd definitely be the one who paid for it. And on matters like that, he knows very well. The men there had no choice. They were following orders. At that point, he calms down a little, realizing something major is behind all this. He asks them to hand over his phone, but they warn him there's still no signal. The whole area has been blocked off. All he can do is wait for news while his son goes through all of that around Takisejong. Elsewhere, that kid from earlier reports everything to the president, including that his daughter is safe. A woman enters his office and says he has a call from the agent in charge of protecting his daughter. He immediately tells her to put it through and asks Agent Nam how she is. She confirms the girl is safe and tells the president to stay calm. Then she hands the phone to Soo-jung, who also says she's fine. He asks if she's hurt, but she says no. She explains that her agent had a bad feeling, so they got out in time. Relieved, the president asks for the phone back. With the phone in hand, the agent says they're on their way to the helicopter and heading for the nearest helipad. For now, they'll keep moving quietly. The president says that's good, but then he asks about Soo-jung, whether he's with them. The agent says that when they escaped, the president immediately sees the problem. If his daughter got out, why couldn't those two? The agent explains that the only reason she escaped alive was because Takesejung was distracted dealing with Soo-jung and Soo-hoo. She apologizes, admitting she ended up using the two of them as bait. The president tells her she did nothing wrong and doesn't need to apologize. But no one else can ever learn that. If anyone finds out, she'll likely face severe backlash. And even if it wasn't intentional, an incident like this could give the opposition everything it needs to turn on his administration. He orders her to keep it secret, no matter the cost. She thanks him for his concern and promises to stay silent. The president thanks her too because she saved his daughter. But the moment he hangs up, he gets another call from Soo-ryun's father. At the scene, the man asks whether the president's daughter also entered the base, and the answer is yes. The guard says he saw her and an agent go through the gates. Soo-ryun's father wonders how, at a time like this, the president won't even take his call, yet seems so concerned about her presence. A president so obsessed with his office that he'd even forgotten his own daughter, or at least that's how it looked, since Soo-jung had already been saved. I keep wondering what he'll do when he finds out that Madman's daughter was rescued while his own was left there, just to be used as bait. And back at the base, all he could do was wait. Then a police car pulled up, and a man barely able to breathe came in with urgent news. Elsewhere in the city, 2 police officers had been found dead, and it was believed Itaiki Se-young was responsible. There was also a chance he'd escaped the perimeter. He'd assumed the bodies of those 2 officers were the protagonist's work, and everyone still thought he was inside the base. But if this had happened, then maybe he'd gotten out. At another agency, they reported that last night, near a shopping mall, 2 police officers were found already boxed up. Even so, the newspapers and the internet were completely silent. The guy looked worried. After all, Itaiki Se-young had entered a US base and dealt with those 2 officers. So how, after all that, was there nothing on TV and not a word online? Because the president of Korea, Soo-jung's father, had locked down the flow of information to protect his presidency. When they showed the photos, the 2 dead officers were identified as Kim Yong-jun and Choi Myung-ji. Apparently they were in uniform when it happened and carrying IDs, so identifying them was easy. He asked what they know so far. The answer, both officers had been on duty last night, but no one knew why they were there. The place where it happened wasn't part of their usual patrol, and there was no record of either of them being sent there. They hadn't even used a police vehicle. It was basically treated as desertion. Worse, the only report came through an anonymous call. They had almost no information. What they did believe was that it happened around 11 p.m. He was furious. If Taek-sung had escaped, they should have at least been warned so they could mobilize. But now they had a fugitive on the loose. He couldn't believe the United States, supposedly the strongest nation in the world, could make such a basic mistake. Then one of his people spoke up. Someone had called, claiming to have information about what happened to those 2. Back at the base, officers arrived at the scene of the incident, and yeah, you can imagine what it looked like. I can't even show it on YouTube, but you get the idea. A little farther ahead, he found Soo-hyun looking like burnt barbecue, if you know what I mean. He wondered how that had happened and thought the protagonist had to be insane. The guy's condition was beyond critical. He looked terrified and his body was still moving. They wondered if it was just some kind of nervous reflex, because being alive in that state would be nothing short of a miracle. He asks what they should do, take him to a doctor, but the answer was that nothing could be done anymore. The best option was to leave him there, secure the area, and start cleanup. Soo-hyun still seemed conscious, though. Tears were running from his eyes. You could say he got exactly what he'd done to the protagonist. Outside, the protagonist was already there, and a few soldiers stopped him. One told him that someone from his own country wanted to speak with him, and was eager to meet him. The protagonist glanced around, then leapt high into the air to escape. But the soldier shouted that the person who wanted to see him was the one responsible for keeping his aunt from being hurt. They were the one who'd ordered her protection. The moment he heard that, the protagonist immediately dropped back to the ground. Anyone who protected his aunt could be considered one of the good guys, so he stayed and went inside with the guards. They told him to rest for the night and that the person who wanted to see him would visit in the morning. They'd prepared a good dinner for him, plus clothes if he wanted to change. They also said he was free to leave the room anytime and walk around outside. Basically, they were scared of him. After apologizing for the inconvenience, the man left the protagonist alone in the room. The next day, Takashi Young had changed clothes, and the person who wanted to meet him was Poe, who said he was very happy to meet him. He explained that America had a major plan, but Takashi Young cut him off and told him to get to the point. The man noted that the protagonist was quite impatient, but he was only 18. Then he laid it out simply. All he needed to know was that America wanted him. The US base represented sovereign, heavily fortified territory fully under their control. Still, they had interfered with what he was doing, and what he wanted now was for the protagonist to join their side so they could help each other. He said the US government and he himself were the ones who stopped stopped the Korean government's attempt to take his aunt. They had orders to seize her on US soil and use her to stop the protagonist. But the US government refused and moved her to safety, where she was fully protected. The protagonist asks if this was the Korean government's doing, and the man says the people behind it were agents of the Korean government, working through an organization called Cassia. He promises they'll fully protect his family if he joins them, but before he can finish, the protagonist says he has something to say. Since this man had guided him to the hotel base, he'd grant him one favor. The man says all he wants to discuss is the protection he can offer his aunt, and him. But the protagonist cuts him off again. He'd better understand that if anything happens to his aunt, he'll be the first held responsible, and the one who turns him against the United States. If he finds even a scratch on his aunt, then he'll have to answer for it, and so will the entire United States, all because of one person. So he'd better carve that into his heart. The guy went pale with panic. You could see the fear all over his face. Takasung was dead serious. Anyway, moving on, inside a car, they headed toward the place where he'd dropped the protagonist off. On the way, he reflected on how he'd tried to persuade the protagonist. It hadn't worked, and in the end, he was the one left in an awkward spot. From the back seat, he caught Takasung's expression, the kind that could scare anyone. When the car finally stopped, they'd reached the place. He pointed to what looked like a tunnel and said he could leave from there without leaving much of a trail. Takasung headed that way, but before he left, the man called out to him and said he had some information to share, and it was exactly what the protagonist wanted. It was a list of where the remaining 8 were located. The closest was Young Da-hun, currently in Yeongdeungpo. As for Kim Jun and Kim Yu, the white-haired one and the green-haired one, they were both at home. But according to the investigation, they seemed far too relaxed inside their own residences, which felt suspicious. The scientist said it was almost like they weren't afraid of the protagonist at all. Then he added one more detail that might interest him even more. He asked if he knew someone named Baek Hee-yeon. The protagonist's eyes widened at once. That was the girl he'd defended that day. The scientist said they'd noticed something interesting. In conversations between Kim Jun and Kim Yu, that girl's name kept coming up whenever they talked about the protagonist. At that moment, a terrifying aura started pouring off Takasung. The scientist panicked, thinking he'd said the wrong thing. But in the blink of an eye, the protagonist leaped away and vanished. The guy's heart nearly stopped, but somehow he survived. Bounding across the city's rooftops, Takasung raced toward where Baek Hee-yeon might be. He was following the scientist's directions, and one look at his face made it clear. He wasn't playing around. On the other side of the city, a man was investigating another guy. He said something similar to what the scientist had brought up, that he knew Baek Hee-yeon, and that she'd also been a victim of the incident from 3 years ago. The one involving those 10 people, the protagonist's parents, and the 8 others. The investigator wondered how he knew that, since there wasn't much information about what had happened to her. The man explained that back then, he got a call about 2 students who were seriously injured, a male and a female student. 2 ambulances were dispatched that day, but in a later call, they were told only one had actually been sent, and the other apparently never made it to the scene. The investigator was starting to understand what that meant. They had really been trying to cover up what happened to the girl. Shaken, the man said he could reveal more about what happened at the hospital and identify the medical staff involved. Because back then, it was considered critical that nothing related to her ever got out, and everything that happened had to be kept completely secret. On the other side of the city, at the psychiatric hospital, inside a room, someone was scribbling on the walls and drawing strange pictures. It was a girl, Baek Hee-yeon. As she stared at the drawings, including one about 2 police officers, she seemed to apologize, saying she had no choice. That's when the pieces finally click into place. 2 cops had been found after going to investigate, and it looks like she was the one who did that to them. Not only that, she was fully responsible. We still don't know exactly why, but it seems those officers were hiding something. Higher up on the wall, another disturbing drawing seemed to depict what happened to the protagonist's parents, and in her mind, she kept calling out the protagonist's name. Back at the interview, the investigator keeps pressing for what happened to Baek Hee-yeon. The man explains they were forced to say only 1 ambulance had been sent to the scene. The investigator asks why Tai Se-young's information was released, but the girl's wasn't. The man admits they were bribed, so they couldn't talk. Even Tai Se-young's parents never knew the other girl was alive. That infuriates the investigator. They hid something this important for years. The man sitting there is clearly terrified, his voice shaking. He says it's horrible, but he couldn't keep carrying this alone anymore, so he told the truth. Powerful people can silence anyone they want, and his family was no exception. When asked what happened to the girl's family, he says they were compensated. That only makes the investigator angrier. Money can't undo what happened. It can't solve everything, especially not what happened to Tae Se-young's parents. The man goes on. Everyone who knew and everyone who saw Baek Cheon's condition was paid to stay silent. Basically, everything about her was buried. But he still wasn't done. He says what happened to the protagonist could easily have been swept under the rug too. That's exactly why he came, to reveal everything he knows. And now he's finally ready to say who sent those 2 officers to their deaths. Before naming them though, he hesitates in panic, because saying it out loud could cost him his safety. Then the door bursts open. His men report that Tae Se-young's file has come in and confirm he was seen leaving the US military base, heading toward Gangnam. But if Tae Seong was at the US base, that practically proves he wasn't the one who dealt with those two officers. In that instant, he realizes who the real culprit must be. He orders them to contact the white-haired guy and the green-haired girl immediately and ask what they're doing right now, because the protagonist is heading toward their homes. One question keeps spinning in his head. If Seong was at the base, someone else had to have done it. And once he connects the dots, he figures out who was probably responsible. Cut to the green-haired girl's house. She's the same girl as before, somehow still bored, which is crazy in the middle of chaos like this. On her phone, she sees a video of Seong moving toward Gangnam, basically right near her house. The look on her face changes immediately. She messages the white-haired guy at his house, telling him to check social media right away. At first he wonders what's wrong with her. Who checks social media in the middle of this? But when he opens it, he sees Seong is heading straight toward where they live. The internet is going crazy, asking who he'll get first, basically turning the whole thing into a meme. The white-haired guy gets furious, wondering if people would still joke like this if it were happening to them. Calling for his mother, who's in the kitchen with several other men, he warns her that Seong is coming to their house. Inside, the atmosphere turns tense. He urges everyone to move out immediately, since Seong could change direction at any moment, and this is their chance to leave. But someone says he's heading for the Gray Complex. The white-haired guy's face says it all. Yujin lives in the Gray Complex. He instantly grabs his phone and calls her. When someone picks up, he tries to warn her, but quickly realizes it isn't her on the other end. He calls out her name and gets no answer. In his mind, he already knows what happened. He immediately heads for the door. His mother asks where he's going, and he tells her they need to leave now, before the protagonist gets there. She insists they're protected, that the military is guarding them. He says that won't be enough. If Seong gets there, it's over. Still, he says he has a way to try to stop him. There's maybe one last smile on his face. It's obvious he's on the edge. Back with the investigator, he's still full of questions. Turning again to the man in the chair, he asks what happened to Baek Chae-yeon after all of this. The man says she was probably dead, which goes against everything the investigator was starting to think. The man insists there's no way she could have survived what happened. The investigator tells his detective to look into everything about Baek Chae-yeon immediately, find any record of her, and bring back information as fast as possible. Then he turns back and asks what happened to her parents. But before he can answer, we're forced to cut away, straight to the protagonist. Facing down some soldiers, he tells them not to stand in his way. They're after the wrong person. At a military post, people lament that neither the police nor the army has managed to stop him. Meanwhile, the white-haired guy is still spiraling. He tells his mother they need to get out as fast as possible. But in the green-haired girl's room, the protagonist already has her in his grip. She begs him to stop, saying she already told the truth. In reality, he's demanding to know what happened to Baek Chae-yeon, because he searched everywhere for her and never found anything. It was as if she'd never existed. Pinning the green-haired girl against the wall, he says the cover-up around her disappearance was so perfect that he started doubting his own memory. But with their family's power, they could have done anything, and she doesn't get to hide behind the excuse that she knew nothing. If she keeps claiming she doesn't know where Baek Chae-yeon is, then she's lying. He presses harder, showing all his rage and remembering everything she did to him. Then he slams her into the wall hard enough to crack it. That was the end for her. Another one of the 8 is gone. Back at the hospital where that girl is being kept, the white-haired guy arrives with several other men. He asks what they're doing there, then shoves aside the doctor and heads straight for Baek Chae-yeon's room. When he finally reaches the door, he finds the girl and says it's been a while since they've seen each other, but one look at her makes it clear she's far from stable, and it almost seems like she'd been waiting for him. Then someone behind them suddenly reports that Baek Chae-yeon has arrived, and when they turn around, Chae-yeon is already on her feet, rushing straight at the boy with shocking speed. Outside, total chaos breaks out as the protagonist reaches the hospital with his sword. Realizing he won't be able to walk in calmly, he smashes through the floor with a jump, reaching the right level in seconds. There are soldiers up ahead, but you can guess how that goes. With his speed, he blows right past them. After tearing through everyone in his way, he heads for her room. Looking through the window, he sees stains splattered everywhere. You can imagine what they really are. As he opens the door, he assumes something terrible may already have happened to her, but what he sees is completely different. The girl is perfectly fine. The same can't be said for the white-haired guy. His condition is so bad, it can't really be shown. He's in horrible shape. His mother is crying, demanding to know what right they had to touch her son, asking who they think they are. But before she can finish, Chae-yeon takes care of her too, saying that Takasung's parents probably said the same thing this woman just did. Then she looks at him and smiles. The protagonist stares back, wide-eyed, realizing she may be even more unstable than he thought. Then a memory takes us back to the day Chae-yeon was introduced to his class. She had transferred from Hoyun Girls' School before coming there. In her introduction, she said she hoped everyone would get along. The teacher added that she had some of the best grades at her old school and warned the class to work hard from now on or they'd be left behind. Back in the present, the protagonist looks at her with dull, empty eyes because he still can't believe she's alive. In another flashback, we see her apparently helping him. The protagonist tells her not to, and for the first time, she hears him actually speak. She even wonders if he could talk at all. He says he hasn't lost anything and doesn't need anyone's help. She says she knows that. But the truth is, inside those trash bags, some of his school supplies had been thrown away by the 8. She had already figured it out and was helping him search through the garbage. He warns that if people find out she's helping him, she'll be targeted too. But she says if anyone sees them, she'll just make fun of him too, pretend she's mocking him, and that way, they won't do anything to her. The protagonist is struck by how she handles things, and he even bites his lip, overwhelmed that someone would do all this for him. In another memory, Shioni had called him into an empty classroom so they could be alone. The boy was already nervous. If anyone saw them together, she'd probably become a laughingstock. But she tells him she got a confession that day. He says that's nice, but she wonders if he really doesn't want to know who it was. He replies that she's pretty and popular, so that's only natural. She asks again if he really doesn't want to know which guy she turned down. Then she reveals it was Lei Suhu, one of the 8. The protagonist is visibly shocked. He says Suhu is the student council president's son, from a family known for academics. But the girl says she doesn't like him. There's something off about him. She says his confession was actually pretty funny, because his friends were there too. He told her people from the same social class should stick together, then invited her to join his group. Then we jump to another memory. The protagonist asks if she's going somewhere after school. She says yes, her friends want to meet up and they're heading to the park. She explains that Hae-jung, one of her friends, is going to introduce her to some people from another class, but the protagonist tells her not to go. She says she can't do that. Lately her friends have been avoiding her, and Hae-jung is the only one still talking to her. Even so, he insists she shouldn't go. She asks what's wrong with it. If she skips that day, she'll probably be rejected by everyone. Then Hae-jung says she's already been rejected, and she asks how. He tells her that the moment she rejected Lee Soo-hoo, the whole school turned on her. She's confused, but he explains that if she goes out with those friends today, the others will probably show up. And if she doesn't do what they say, she'll never have friends again and will be forced to obey them. She asks what they would even tell her to do, and the protagonist asks if she uses any substances, smokes once in a while, or has ever taken something without permission and never returned it. You probably get what he means. He says if she's never done those things, they'll make her do them, and if she refuses, she'll be cast out and never have any friends at school again. In another memory, the protagonist is taking his usual beating, but this time, someone steps in. That person is Ji-yoon. Her face was still burned into his memory, and even with the marks on her, she looked like the same girl from back then. He places a hand on her face and pulls her into a trembling embrace, whispering her name. Then another memory takes us back to that day. The protagonist is on the ground, apparently after stepping in to stop what they were going to do to Ji-yoon. The guy with stiff hair demands to know how he dared interfere. On the floor, the protagonist can only groan. The thug asks why he's so interested in his friend's toy, and who said he could steal her from them. He demands to know what the girl is to him. On the other side, she was lying on the ground too. The green-haired girl says they'd better make sure they really crush his little toy. The white-haired one says she's making too much fuss. After all, the one rejected by the group was Lee Soo-hoo. The president's daughter says she'd heard he had been spending a lot of time with her, and asks if they were dating. He stays silent. In that state, he probably couldn't even answer. Lee Soo-hoo just laughs and asks if they really are dating. Soo-hoo-yoon wonders if that could be true, but can't believe it. He thought they only talked. The president's daughter looks angry that he interrupted their fun. As Soo-hoo-yoon steps closer, he realizes he's only making Soo-jung even angrier, and then starts doing exactly what you'd expect. The protagonist begs them to stop. He'll do anything. All he wants is for them not to touch Si-yoon. The psycho's grin makes his intentions obvious, and in that moment, what you'd been fearing is about to begin. But then, to everyone's shock, Ji-yoon is suddenly on her feet, standing near the window, and without warning, she jumps. The thugs panic, wondering if she just died. The protagonist's face says it all. He has no idea what happened, or why this was happening to her, and to him. Back in the hospital, his hand is on the girl's face, as if savoring the warmth of her touch. When he calls her name, she cups his face and says he's probably cried a lot. Looking at him now, she can barely recognize him. She says he must have a lot of questions, but the most important thing right now is getting out first. They head for the door and step into the corridor, but are quickly intercepted by several guards. From the protagonist's expression, he has no time for this. Before he can act, a man steps in. Apparently someone from the hospital who works with Xenon. The girl clearly isn't naive. She knew exactly who she was dealing with. She thanks him and says he did well. The man tells them to stick to the escape plan. She calls to the protagonist and the two slip away. They quietly leave in a police car. Inside, she says they got out easily by sheer luck. Then she changes the subject and says he probably wants to know how she is. But before she explains anything, she stares at him and asks, when he got so big, where did her cute little Takaseon go? The protagonist still can't believe any of this. He never thought she was still alive. She asks if he's not going to say anything to her or even ask what happened. But the only thing he asks is whether she's hurt anywhere. He says he thought she was dead. Suddenly, the girl throws her arms around him and finally breaks down in tears. Over and over, she says she's here, she didn't die. She says she couldn't tell him and apologizes for making things so hard on him. The protagonist can't hold back anymore either and starts crying too, holding her hand as they cling to each other. They remember everything that happened and are simply grateful the other is still here. Anyway, moving on, we return to that guy being questioned by the investigator. Getting straight to it, the investigator asks if he knows who was responsible for those two police officers being killed and whether Baek Ye-yoon's parents could have been behind it. Even nervous, the guy says it wasn't Baek Ye-yoon's parents who killed the officers. They actually died in a car accident a year ago. Everyone inside the vehicle died. The investigator is completely confused, but the man goes on, saying her parents were not good people. The investigator asks what he means by that. What did they do? Shaken, the guy says it's because of them that everyone stayed silent. They offered 10 million to keep people's mouths shut. And inside the truck, the protagonist is hearing the same story directly from Baek Yun. She asks if he wants to know what her parents did after covering up her real condition in exchange for money. The protagonist can't even find words for how awful that is. The girl, clearly not in a normal state, says they received 200 million to stay silent about what had happened to her. In short, her parents kept quiet about her situation just for the money. They had basically sold their own daughter, and she says they did even worse. After taking that huge payout, they went after everyone who had contact with her and knew the truth, bribing them too to stay silent. In the end, everyone was forced to forget Baek Yun had ever existed, and it was all led by her own parents, who sold her for money. Hearing that, Tae can only think about how unbearable that must have been for her. He slams the side of the truck, hard enough to make it swerve across the road. She tells him to calm down. It was a long time ago, and there's no point getting angry now. She says she was in a coma for about a year, but she knows he went through something similar too, and asks when he found out that his parents had also died. But the protagonist still can't contain himself, and the rage on his face is obvious. She says that when she woke up, the people around her told her everything her parents had done. In that moment, she says, she almost wished she had died too, because then she wouldn't have had to live through any of it. Cutting her off, Baek Shi-young asks where her parents are now after everything they did to her. She says they're dead, killed in a car crash a year ago. Then the scene shifts. We're back in the hospital room, where there was even a drawing of that crash on the wall. After traveling for a long time, they finally reach their destination. Apparently, they plan to leave from there by boat to throw the soldiers off their trail. The protagonist keeps asking if she has any other relatives and wonders what happened to her brother. She says he was forced into the army not long after their parents died. Baek Shi-young can't understand how he could leave his sister alone like that, but she says it wasn't his choice. While he was heading home, the military police basically forced him to enlist and took him away. They were trying to control everything connected to this girl. The protagonist says he's heard enough. He already knows what happened. But she says there's more, and asks if he isn't curious about the people who helped her. He cuts her off again and says he'll do his part. He'll take revenge on everyone involved, everyone who made her suffer. She tells him he doesn't need to suffer for her. He already has enough problems. Still, he says this won't be hard for him and promises her he'll deal with every last one of the people who put her through this. He even says he'll do it in her name, and together, they'll get their revenge. But she lowers her head and gives him a strange little smile. She thanks him for being willing to help, but says she doesn't need him, and he shouldn't do it. He's startled, but she explains that the one who has to deal with them is her. Only then will the revenge truly feel like it was hers. She has to do it with her own hands, or it won't feel right. And that, to her, is true revenge. Then she admits that last night she took out 2 police officers, the same ones who were there that night, where everything happened. She says she cut her hair to look like the protagonists, so now they probably think he did it, and she apologizes for that. She had planned to carry out her revenge quietly, from the shadows, without anyone noticing. But after seeing what Takeshi Young was doing, how he was striking back at everyone, she found the courage to face them head-on and finish her revenge in the deadliest way possible. She says everyone needs to know that the two of them are the real power in this world, and together they can crush everyone who made him suffer. Back at the interview, the witness keeps talking about what happened to Cheon's parents. He says that before the crash, on the very day the video about the protagonist's parents spread, they came to them and said the whole state was in chaos, that things had gotten too big, and the easiest solution was money. So everyone had to stay quiet about what happened to their daughter. If they cooperated, they'd all get a huge payout. Everyone there knew it wasn't really an offer, it was a threat. If they refused, they'd probably end up dead. The man says he did try to refuse, but they were powerful people, and everyone was terrified of them. Ignoring them was nearly impossible unless you didn't care about your life. The investigator can barely believe what he's hearing. It still feels unreal. But the witness goes on, saying that a few days later the crash happened, killing Baek Cheon's parents, and he knows it wasn't an accident. Apparently, he has proof. He shows his phone. On the day of the crash, he received a message that said, "Wait, you're next." At that point, it looked like everything had been planned, even the crash itself. The investigator says that makes no sense. Who would have ordered something like that? Maybe the people being bribed, maybe outsiders, or maybe even Tae Young, but he doesn't know the protagonist was in a coma back then, so that theory falls apart. Just then, another man opens the door and walks in. He says he told him to investigate Baek Shion's parents, and demands to know what he's doing here. But the investigator says there's nothing to investigate. Baek Shion is very much alive. The man asks what that means, and he says he got word that Tae Young is going to see her. The police and the military are already heading for them. The investigator grits his teeth and wonders why the police are involved at all. They're tactical forces. The police will only get in the way. Things are going badly for him. Back on the boat, the girl tells him to keep pursuing his revenge to the end. She won't stop hers either, and they should each take revenge in their own way, without interfering. She says her revenge is something she has to face alone, but the protagonist can't accept that. He hasn't seen any sign she can protect herself, and he's scared of what might happen to her. She keeps saying the world has to become a better place, and the less evil there is, the more good can reign. That's why she has to get rid of all of them. He asks how she plans to do that, and she says she's going to create a new world. She's starting to sound like Kira, talking about wiping out evil, and her expression makes it clear she's not in a stable state of mind. Then another boat approaches, larger than the one they're on. Inside is an older man, the kind who looks like the leader of some secret league. When it arrives, it's obvious the girl knows him. She says he took too long and she almost thought he wouldn't come. The old man says she was still trying to convince the protagonist, then addresses him as Master, as if expecting all of them to leave together. He calls to the protagonist too, but the protagonist doesn't move. The old man says they shouldn't force him. If he wants to come, he should follow his heart. Staring him down, the protagonist asks who this old man really is. The man says he has no name. They are only voices meant to guide lost people like him. For now, that's all he needs to know. He invites the protagonist to come again, but he remains still. Then he finally says no. Just like she said, each of them will continue their own revenge, and his still isn't finished. So he stays behind. The girl is saddened by that, while beside her, another man seems to chuckle and remarks that kids these days are actually pretty interesting. Then Cheyenne's boat starts up and heads out into open water. Inside, she grips a gun in her hand. Behind her, that same guy asks why her friend didn't come with them when he had the chance. She says she'd never seen him before and doesn't think he's one of them. The man tells her not to talk about him like he's one of her patients. In an instant, she points the gun at him and asks if he really said that. Then she says all of this is to ensure she can build a new nation. Unfazed, he tells her this is her last chance to lower the gun. If she doesn't, she'll lose her chance to live, and the aura he gives off is terrifying. She immediately raises the gun higher, but the old man steps in to stop them. He says they need to stop Takase 1 from taking the daughter of China's president. They have to secure her first. The girl asks why that matters, and he says if anything happens to that girl, the future itself could be compromised. They need to resolve this before Takase 1 corners them. He believes the best outcome for everyone is to stop it from happening, especially for Takase 1. Meanwhile, we see the grief and despair of the parents of those 8 victims. Now they're the ones feeling the pain of losing a child. In the car, Soo-Yun-ho's father can hardly believe any of this is real. His driver gets a call confirming that Jang Soo-jung, the president's daughter, had boarded a flight out of the military base on the very day of the incident, and apparently she was perfectly fine. Hearing that only makes him even angrier. He even calls the president by name and curses him as a bastard because his daughter is alive and safe while all of this happened to his own son. Meanwhile, the protagonist has already caught that investigator and is demanding to know where Soo-jung is. The man says she's going to Cheongwon Airport the next day. He swears he's telling the truth and begs the protagonist to believe him, to let this go. The protagonist throws him aside. Whether he survives or not, we don't know, but now he knows both Soo-jung's current location and where she'll be next. So he goes after her. At the National Assembly, the president is beginning the formal launch of his presidency, and with that, he tells everyone to stand. Then he launches into a bunch of grand promises about drafting a constitution to protect the country and pursuing a peaceful reunification of his homeland so people can support one another and citizens can live in safety. Outside, soldiers guard the building, but intruders are watching from above. Baek Chae-yoon among them, along with one of her men. She warns him not to interfere with whatever Tai Kai-se-young is about to do, or he'll only anger him. This revenge belongs to him alone. The man asks if Tai Kai-se-young will really come here, and she says almost certainly. Soo-jung was one of the 8, so she's high on his list. Her man says they need to be careful, but Chae-yoon says the best option may be to wipe out everyone here. He asks if she's out of her mind. There's no way they can do that. She says her heart has suffered enough, and anyone who stayed silent through her pain is probably an enemy too, so she wouldn't mind flushing them all away. In her eyes, none of these people became police or soldiers to protect others. They're just parasites serving those with higher status. So if they get in the way, they deserve to be taken down too. Even the man beside her is shaken by the look on her face. She says she shares Tae-sung's revenge for the sake of a bright, clear future. Meanwhile, the protagonist races toward the site. The moment he hits the ground, panic spreads. Everyone knows Tae-sung has arrived. People start running. One of them drops a phone, and through it, the protagonist hears the president talking about better protection for the public and guaranteeing their safety. Then the president calls his daughter and tells her the best thing is to live abroad. That's the only way she'll survive and live in peace. He says she's the only person in danger in Korea. Wearing a cap, she's at the airport with Hooni. The fear on her face is obvious, and she asks if she'll be coming too, if she'll leave for overseas with her. She says yes. She'll act as her bodyguard. She reminds her not to forget the instructions she was given. No social media, no instant messaging, and for her safety, all her schooling will be moved to home study. She isn't to contact anyone or make friends. Soo-young asks if that means she just has to stay in America, and the agent says yes, that's the rule. She has to remain there for at least a year. Still, she admits that even after a year, nothing will change unless Takashung is captured. The only thing that could shorten her stay in America is if the protagonist surrenders, which probably won't happen. Elsewhere, the old man speaks with another man. They admit they'll never be able to stop that child, the protagonist. The man asks whether they don't have some kind of manual countermeasure and whether they could use it to stop him. We don't know exactly what it is, but it sounds like some kind of biological weapon. The old man says it won't work more than once anyway, and this isn't the right time. He can't be compared to anything normal. He's unlike anything they've ever seen. They have to proceed with extreme caution or they'll be destroyed. He calls Special Agent Akon, the one who was with Ji-yun, and asks how long until Ji-yun boards the plane and it takes off. Akon says boarding starts in 20 minutes, so the old man tells him to hurry. Ji-yun has already arrived. If anything goes wrong, they must move to Plan B. For now, their priority is helping the president's daughter. The man acknowledges the order and confirms it. All they can do now is wait. The old man says he'll try to distract the protagonist and talk to him. The other man asks if he's crazy, he's going alone, but the old man says it isn't dangerous. He just wants a calm conversation. He doesn't think the protagonist sees him as an enemy. All he wants is a brief talk. At the airport, several men approach the agent and Soo-jung, verify their identities, and tell them they need to leave the airport immediately. Takase-jung has already arrived. The girls panic. The protagonist is already on his way after her, and soon he runs into the old man. The old man says it's tragic they've met under these circumstances, but really he has a favor to ask. Please let Soo-jung go this time. He believes that's the best path for the country's future, and the only way to build the nation Ji-yoon envisioned. To do that, Soo-jung needs to stay alive and negotiate with the current government, changing the forces that rule their world. She'd be a key piece in shifting the country's mindset and weakening the current regime. In short, they want to use the girl as leverage. He adds that this was Ji-yoon's request too, but the protagonist asks if he really thinks he can hold him here alone. The old man says that if he harms Soo-jung, Shie-yoon will be disappointed. She's waiting for him on the other side to build the world they always wanted, but Tae Kwon-jung says he doesn't care about government deals. All he wants is to finish his revenge, and he won't tolerate anyone using Ji-yoon as a shield. If the old man tries that again, he'll be next, so he needs to get out of the way. Leaving the old man behind, he heads straight for Soo-jung. The old man nearly drops from a heart attack. Meanwhile, Soo-jung is still trying to get out with those men. The agent asks where they're going and whether that route is really secure. She says once they board the plane, Tae Kwon-jung will still be a major threat to her. The man says they know and tells her not to worry. There's no way Tae Kwon-jung can find this route because they're using an unofficial one. Outside, soldiers are being briefed on how to stop the protagonist. If they see him, they have permission to kill. Everyone is told to stay alert, but Tae Kwon-jung is already standing behind one soldier, telling him to move. Terrified, the man drops to the ground, and Tae Kwon-jung starts walking past him without a problem. But then the soldier makes a very stupid choice. He opens fire on the protagonist. He dies instantly. The old man gets word that Tae Kwon-jung is heading for the runway, exactly where Soo-jung is going. He says the protagonist has an incredibly sharp sixth sense and orders every unit to avoid contact with him. From here on, resistance is pointless. But the other man says time has already run out, and Soo-jung should be able to leave safely. At least, that's what it seemed. The protagonist keeps running past everyone and finally spots her from a fair distance away. He's found her at last, and lets out a huge shout. But it's the exact moment she boards the plane, just as it's about to take off. He knows that even if he jumps, he won't reach it in time, so he throws his sword at the plane and hits it, dragging it back down fast. Just like that, he stops her escape. By then, countless soldiers have surrounded him. It doesn't matter. Even the massive explosion changes nothing, and the girls are still trying to flee. But when they look back, there he is, standing on top of the plane, pulling free the sword he'd embedded there. They start running, begging for their lives. Tae-seung steps right in front of them. For her, this is the end. His face makes it clear what he's about to do, and it looks like Soo-jung is about to die right there. At this point, it really seems over for both of them. Tae-seung calls the girl's name, and all around him police have already closed in. He isn't intimidated in the slightest. The girl, on the other hand, is in terrible shape. She's terrified. She calls out his name and says she's sorry for everything she's done. She admits it's all her fault, and what happened to him and Shie-eung was inhuman, something she'll never truly forget. Still, she begs for one more chance to make things right, pleading for her life. Then, to her shock, the protagonist says she can go if she wants to live. Her eyes widen, and she thanks him, but he wasn't speaking to her. He was talking to her agent. He tells the agent that if she stays out of his way, he'll spare her. He has no intention of killing her. She can leave, but if she attacks him, she'll die. The agent realized she had a chance to escape and didn't hesitate. As she started to get up, Soo-jung begged her not to go, pleading with her not to leave her alone. Right there on the spot, the girl kept begging to be saved, then started calling for help from all the soldiers around them. Suddenly, she snapped, shouting that she was the president's daughter and demanding that they protect her, asking why no one was doing anything. But by then, the protagonist had already raised his sword and was ready to finish the job. With a single slash, he split the girl in two. The satisfaction on his face said it all. He had finally taken revenge on her, and another of the 8 was gone. In his mind, he speaks to his mother and father, telling them only one remains. That was the end of Soo-jung. Meanwhile, in a government office in Japan, several men had gathered to discuss whether there was any way to pressure Takase-jung. One of them orders tighter security for everyone connected to him around the world. They don't want to provoke the protagonist even further. Still, they believe they need to find some way to stop him, and wonder where the source of his power comes from. By now, it's clear that everything he does goes far beyond human limits. They also think that instead of killing him, they should seize that power and study it, because it could help create a different world. In their eyes, killing him would be a waste, and the global order could be reshaped by whichever country obtains that power first. The bald man says that neither weapons, nor even an army can overpower the protagonist. They believe that if thousands of soldiers were trained the same way, and managed to gain similar power, they could dominate the world. The question is what happens after that. Cut to the United States, where that scientist is talking to the blonde guy. He shares information about who would lead the special forces assigned by China, Zhao Xingqiao. He now sees the whole world mobilizing to find some way to stop the protagonist. He says it's only a matter of time before Takase-jung becomes a global threat. The blonde man says China probably already has 3,000 agents on their soil, and that the protagonist is spiraling out of control. That makes the scientist angry. If they're there, they're acting as spies, trying to learn what they're doing. The blonde man adds that they've also started noticing Japan's movements. It was obvious now. The world was beginning to mobilize in response to everything happening. He asks the scientist whether he has any interest in striking first, since if they get close to Tak Sun-young, they might be able to claim his power before anyone else. But the scientist stays calm and says that won't happen. The blonde man asks how he can be so sure, since those countries have enormous political influence, top-tier equipment, and are definitely ready to ignore diplomatic consequences if it means capturing the protagonist and using his power. The scientist asks if he wants to make a bet because he believes none of them will capture the protagonist. If he truly loses control, everyone is finished. No special force can stop him. The blonde man wonders whether he could be bribed with money and power, but the scientist says that if that were what he wanted, he'd already have it. That isn't his goal. The blonde man then wonders if China might even offer him land and greater protection for his family and relatives. The scientist admits that could tempt him, since he's desperately trying to avenge his parents and protect his family. He says they need reinforcements and broader support inside the United States. The blonde man asks if he really plans to use Airborne Division 82 to protect a civilian family. For context, that division was extremely important and reserved only for people of the highest value. Using it for the protagonist's aunt would be something outrageous. But the scientist says that's exactly his plan, because they need Tak Sung to owe them a favor. By protecting his aunt to the very end, they might earn at least a little mercy from him. That way, Tak Sung will owe them all one. Outside, under heavy rain, Soo-hyun's father was in terrible shape. The look on his face showed how shaken he was, but he made a promise. He would return all the pain he had felt and make those responsible suffer something even worse. He would avenge what happened to his son and make them all pay. Even the president had betrayed his trust, and he doesn't believe even the president will escape his plans. After everything that happened, all the parents who had lost their children gave a major interview. There, they issued a warning to Tak Sung, since their children had died in horrifying ways. All of them said the government was incompetent and unable to protect its people. And now, ironically, they were the ones in that position, when not long ago, all of this had happened to the protagonist's parents. Now they were feeling for themselves what it meant to have no one help them. But the public was starting to take center stage too. Because in the middle of all this, many innocent people had also died. Their families were devastated by everything that was happening. The media then turned fully against Tak Sung, tearing apart his image as public opinion shifted and grew angrier. Those who once saw Tak Sung as a hero vanished, and now social media was filled with one message: he had to be stopped. No matter what had happened to him, he had crossed every limit. People were turning against the protagonist, and now he was seen as a threat to national security and to the public itself. Tak Sung had become a public enemy. In his room, tablet in hand, the president kept replaying that video, asking himself if it had really happened, if his daughter was truly dead. He looked completely broken. Collapsed on the floor, he had no hope left for a better future. The only thing he could think about was revenge, making Tak Sung pay for everything he had done to him. Then the door opened and someone entered. It was Director Park, head of the National Intelligence Service. He could tell from the president's face that he was in no condition to deal with this, though the president insisted he was fine. The man had something to say, so he got straight to the point. Then we see that old man, introduced as the one who would advise them this time. He presents himself. His name is Yang Yeon. Director Park explains that Mr. Yang had served as a training instructor long ago. In fact, he was one of the men who helped build the foundation of the country before retiring. In short, the old man was someone very important. The president asks if there is any way to stop Tak Sung, and the old man says yes, it's possible. The president is stunned and immediately asks what he needs, saying he'll provide whatever it takes. But the old man says that first, they must arrest Young Da-hun, the last of the 8 still alive. The president asks why, but the answer is obvious. He's the only one left standing, which would draw the prodigy's attention. Out in the city, Tak Sung kept causing chaos, smashing through everything in front of him. The soldiers had already been ordered to retreat. He wondered why. They were face to face with the protagonist, so why weren't they allowed to act? Still, they remained in place. Then, stepping forward, a huge man began staring him down, claiming his abilities didn't matter. He was a former world boxing champion, and at least in size, he matched the protagonist. He challenged him to a fight, just the two of them. But with one light punch, the guy was sent flying straight into a building. Even he couldn't do a thing. Above them, several helicopters began surrounding the area. From inside, the protagonist spotted Young Da-hun. He was fleeing the scene. That made him furious, and he started leaping in that direction. But he quickly realized he wouldn't reach him in time, so he climbed to the top of that building. There, he could see a photo of all 8, including Young, and he swore he would find him and finish his revenge. Back at the building where Zi-yun and that man were, she had also seen the video of what the protagonist did to Soo-jung. She says she wished she had done it herself. Those words clearly unsettled the guy beside her. Then he got a call from the agency, ordering him to leave a team behind to watch Takise-young and to have everyone else there return as quickly as possible. He hesitates, wondering if that's really the right move, since Takise-young was nearby, and pulling back all the soldiers went against their original plan. Still, he's told they need to get out immediately, because active spies from other parts of the world were surrounding the area. In fact, Ziyun herself had become a target after they discovered she might be important to the protagonist, so they had eyes on her. He says they should leave a few agents behind, escort Ziyun, and get her out of there as fast as possible. That she's the most important person they need to protect right now, and that she'll definitely be the key to stopping the protagonist someday. He keeps insisting she's their top security priority, even above his own life. They have to report any move Xie-1 makes, and she isn't to go anywhere without permission. He assures her he heard her message, and the girl realizes she overheard part of it. She wonders if she'll have to go back too, but he says he's only following orders from above and asks her not to be angry with him. Meanwhile, aboard the helicopter, Young and Dahun, along with the president and the old man, arrive at the site. The president wonders why there's nothing in the area. It just looks like empty forest. Then, pointing to a hidden spot, the old man says they're going below it, into what is basically a massive tunnel. They get into a car and head toward the secret base. The president is still curious about what exactly this place is, but the old man says they're almost there and that he'll explain everything when they arrive. Once they stop in front of the enormous gate, the president realizes it's a huge facility. He's stunned. He didn't even know this place existed, and it's absolutely massive. Inside, the old man says this is where they'll capture Takei 101. The president starts getting irritated and asks what the plan actually is, since no one has told him anything. Looking over the structures, he thinks Takei 101 could tear this place apart easily and that it doesn't seem especially secure. But the old man says they have a setup designed to neutralize him. The president still doesn't understand, and the old man adds that the method has already been proven. The president asks what that method is, and the old man says someone with strength, speed, and senses just like Takei 101 had already existed in the past. The president asks what he's talking about, and the old man says it happened around 30 years ago. The president calls it nonsense. He's never heard of anything like that. He asks how someone like that could have existed without anyone talking about it, especially when the entire country is panicking because of this current one. Not even the president had heard about an incident from 30 years ago. The old man explains that back then, it was easy to shape public opinion and much harder to access information than it is today. The president says that even so, it's impossible no one would know, but the old man says something had been done to the citizens, and they remember it differently. In fact, even the president already knew who this man with all those powers was. The conversation is getting even stranger, but the old man finally says his name was Marushi. At once, the president seems to remember something. Director Park explains that Marushi was, for a time, the best agent in the Korean CIA. The president realizes then that he had worked for the country and asks where he is now. But the old man says he's long dead. No longer in this world. That's what makes it strange. With all those powers, what could possibly have taken him down? The president is confused. If he worked for Korea, then who killed him? And if even he died, that meant the protagonist could too. The old man says that, to be precise, the group responsible for killing him and containing him wasn't part of the government's plan. It was the North Koreans who created the operation to capture Marushi. And it all happened because, on one occasion, he alone successfully carried out a mission that destroyed 3 North Korean military squadrons all by himself, the same way Taksin-young is doing now. And back then, he was even younger than the protagonist is now. The president says that even someone like him was captured and killed. The old man says yes, he was captured, but they failed to kill him. He explains they never intended to kill the protagonist either, only to capture him and use his power. But in the end, Marushi still managed to escape. The president is still deeply confused and asks, once and for all, how he died. The old man says he was killed while fighting rebel forces. The president can't believe it. A man that strong shouldn't die over something so minor. Marushi-young had infiltrated a submarine in the East Sea, and while carrying out his mission, the submarine sank to an extreme depth. Even he couldn't make it back to the surface. Cutting back to the city, Takase-young is still wondering where Jung and Darin are. As he approaches, he realizes he's reached Nungwan High School, his old school, the same place where all of it happened. With one leap, he lands on the rooftop. Looking down, memories begin to flood back, like the time he went to the principal and said they were being excluded at school, only to be told it was normal, that everyone grows through that phase, and that the principal had too much to worry about to deal with him. Staring below, he sees the place where it all happened, and the flashbacks keep coming, along with the words he once heard. The only person who had been there to help him was Chie. Jung remembers everything that happened to the girl, and everything that happened to his own life, and surely to his parents too. He says he'll finish his revenge, and the thought only fuels his rage. With one massive punch, he splits the school building straight down the middle, destroying the place where all those terrible things happened to him. Back with the president, he goes to see Young Da-hoon's father. When they meet, he thanks him for coming. The president explains that all the other children are dead, and the only one still alive is his son, so he has to do everything possible to keep him alive no matter what. The president adds that this is no longer the safest place, since it seems Takei-seung also knows about it. Young Da-hun looks terrified. The president says that according to the unit commander, Takei Se-young is already moving toward this place. Since the boy is now his only target, the president plans to move him to a secure location they've prepared. The boy's father asks if they're sure this is necessary, then thanks the president for coming himself. The president says he came personally because he knew the man wouldn't hand his son over to just anyone. If someone else had come, he might not have believed them. The father can only thank him, but of course it isn't that simple. The president has another plan. In the car, he barely even tries to talk to the boy. He says everything will be fine, but his face gives away his real intention: to use him as bait. Outside the school, Takei Se-young keeps moving. A car has just arrived in front of him, and back at the secret base, they've reached their destination. Young Da-hun asks where they are, and the president says it's a place even Takei Se-young won't find. He tells him not to worry, they'll capture him and kill him. Meanwhile, the car that stopped in front of the protagonist points him to the exact location where Young Da-hun is being taken and tells him to stop sending innocent police officers and soldiers to their deaths. Takei Se-young says all of this is their fault. They attacked him first. Ignoring everything else, he heads for Young Da-hun to finally bring his revenge to its end. At the base, Director Park congratulates the president for bringing the boy. The president says he had to speak to the boy's father in person to make it happen, since he wouldn't trust just anyone with his son. Director Park praises him and asks about the boy's condition. The president says he's badly shaken, and inside a chamber, the boy pounds on the door, begging to be with his father. He's essentially trapped behind the screen, and the old man watches everything as the boy begs to be let out. The president wonders if they really can draw the protagonist's attention and make him come there. The old man says that as long as Young Da-hun is there, Takesyung will have no choice but to enter the base. The president wonders whether he'll realize it's bait, since the whole thing feels too suspicious. The old man says it isn't just a trap. If Young Da-hun is there, he'll serve a purpose, and not just by drawing the protagonist in. What the old man really means is that the boy will still serve as bait even after he's dead. He's been handed over so the protagonist can finish his revenge, and only after that will they put their real plan into action, because he has to believe it isn't a trap. Then a call comes in on their phone. The protagonist has reached the area, and the plan must begin immediately. Inside the chamber, the boy grows more desperate, begging them to open the door. Outside, the protagonist has already arrived and managed to locate the base. In his mind, he calls out the boy's name. Then he glances to the side and sees countless police officers surrounding the area, but he pays them no attention and keeps moving toward his target. With his sword, he strikes a rock with full force and detonates a bomb hidden there. Realizing there could be traps like that, he ends up exposing the base's entrance. The soldiers are stunned that he figured it out so quickly, but now it's easy for him to reach Young Da-hun, and with sheer strength, he forces the door open with ease. The boy starts to panic. Now he's face to face with him. He tried to run, only to stop short at the sword lodged in the ceiling. Behind him, the protagonist stood ready to finish his revenge. The hide-and-seek was over. This would be the end for all 8 of them, including Tae-seung. At last, he could put everything that had happened to rest. Now, cutting to outside the base, some police officers gave the order for the bomb squad to move, and a huge explosion went off. It did absolutely nothing to Tae-seung. Now he could finally do what he came there to do. You could see it on his face. He was completely unhinged, on the verge of doing the one thing he'd waited so long for. He hurled Da-hun into the wall, and the impact alone caused him intense pain. Da-hun groaned on the floor, but then Tae-seung stomped down on his leg. He ordered him to get up, but as Da-hun tried, he noticed a strange gas pouring into the chamber from above. The moment he stood, Tae-seung struck again, sending him flying across the room. Then the protagonist grabbed him by the neck and pinned him to the wall. At that moment, he realized his vision was starting to blur. Pressed against the wall, Da-hun started laughing like a madman, calling Tae-seung an idiot. Something was being pumped into the chamber to weaken him. Outside, watching through the cameras, the president asked the old man what that fog in the chamber was. He wondered if it was some kind of biological weapon, but the old man said none of that would work on Tae-seung. His body was far too strong, and his system could withstand anything a human could endure. So the president asked what it really was, since it clearly wasn't what he thought. The old man answered that it was a rather special substance. To put it simply, weed. The president was stunned. How was that supposed to help? The old man explained that in a massive enough dose, it could still distort Tae-seung's senses. He knew it wouldn't kill him, but with that much of it, the president could only think his country might go bankrupt. This old man had used an absurd amount. The old man said it might at least impair his vision, and for now, that was enough. Back to the protagonist, he was finishing Da-hun off, and with one final punch, he sent the bastard flying. His revenge was complete. Under his breath, he spoke the names of his mother, his father, and Zi-yun. With a disturbing smile, he declared that his revenge was finally over. He'd sent every last one of them to the grave. But while he smiled, he started feeling strange and realized it had to be that haze filling the chamber. At that moment, the old man gave an order, and the floor beneath the protagonist suddenly opened. He started to fall. He reached for the wall, trying to stop himself, but it was coated in oil so he couldn't get a grip. Takeseong kept falling without end. At the bottom of the shaft, he finally saw who was behind all of this. In the distance stood the president, the old man, and Director Park. He immediately started shouting the president's name. The protagonist hit the ground, his senses already badly affected. He kept calling out to the president, while the old man ordered them to continue the plan. From the top of the shaft, several flashbangs were thrown straight at him, further wrecking his sight. The old man believed that between the drugs and the flashbangs, Tae-sung's senses would be completely scrambled, and for the moment, it was working. The president thought this was their chance to kill him, but the old man said that even with his senses impaired, nothing they had would be enough to put him down. If they wanted to get rid of Takasuyong, they had to follow his plan. Director Park added that countries around the world were fighting each other just for a chance to capture the protagonist. He thought they should try extracting some of his DNA so they could study him. The president hated the idea. He just wanted this nightmare ended for good. The old man replied that they should learn from Korea's failed plan with that earlier guy who resembled the protagonist. They shouldn't attempt something beyond their limits. Trying to take anything from Takasuyong might not work at all because he'd learned from the past and the same trick wouldn't fool him twice. He also knew the substances they used now probably wouldn't work a second time, since with senses like his, he'd adapt perfectly by then, and if he escaped this time, they would never capture him again. So he asked if Park was really sure about trying to extract DNA. That shut Director Park up fast, and he changed his tune immediately. The old man said they should move to the final stage, and from above the chamber, something like cement started pouring down onto the protagonist. He knew bullets lose force in water, and cement was even denser. If they dumped it over the protagonist, his movements should be completely restrained. Once immobilized by the hardening mass, he wouldn't be able to use his strength at all, just struggle uselessly. The president asked how long it would take before the protagonist could move again and try something. The old man said he had no idea how long they could keep him trapped, but he was certain that even now, Tae-sung's body was developing resistance to this kind of attack. The president could only stare, shaken by how overpowered he was. Still, he knew they had to finish everything before Tae-sung came back to his senses. Meanwhile, inside Takeshi Young's mind, he heard a voice. It seemed to belong to the owner of the sword, telling him to come back, that it was still too soon for him to face Arab. The protagonist had no idea who Arab was, but the voice kept talking, saying he must not show weakness by letting himself die. Only his rage could move mountains. In front of him stretched a strange landscape, while the voice kept echoing in his head, saying that the one with an endless fighting spirit would receive the sword's blessing. And this was the moment Takeshi Young would finally receive that blessing, the very one he'd wanted since the days he trained on his rooftop. Before him lay a completely devastated world, and the man said that when they met again, he would do something, but unfortunately, we never find out what. Cutting back to the base, some soldiers were inspecting the area, even trying to pull Takeshi Young's sword out of the ceiling, but they couldn't budge it. It was far too heavy. They wondered how Takeshi Young could lift that thing with one hand when it would probably take several men to move it. Then one of them noticed something strange. With his hands on it, he could feel the blade trembling. He warned his partner that something was wrong with the sword. Right then, a massive force burst out of it, so powerful it even shook the trees around the perimeter. Something bizarre was happening, and down inside the cement, his body nearly petrified, Takeshi Young opened his eyes. Using sheer strength, he began cracking apart all the concrete piled over him and broke free. The old man and the president immediately realized something was wrong. The protagonist was breaking through the cement. At the same time, the sword stuck in the ceiling started radiating even more power, then apparently tore through the structure and flew toward Takeshi Young's body. The soldiers noticed it had vanished. Down below, the president asked Governor Yang whether the protagonist had already regained consciousness. The old man admitted he hadn't expected him to wake up so fast. Still, that wouldn't change their plan. No matter how hard he fought, there was no escaping this place. At that exact moment, a huge tremor shook the facility. He wondered what was happening as the sword burst through the ceiling and entered the area where they were. It almost looked alive. He asked what it was doing there, and the old man snapped that this was the perfect time to run. They had to go now. As they fled, the sword moved on its own, heading straight for Takeshi Young and smashing through the concrete that had pinned him down, shattering it completely. In a panic, they rushed to a nearby car and decided they had to get out of there as fast as possible. While they were on the move, the old man said he was activating his final plan. He was going to bury Takeshi Young in that place, so they needed to get clear before the detonation. He informed the commander that the plan had failed and that Takeshi Young would escape at any moment. The commander replied that preparations were complete. Everything was ready. By the time they finally crossed the end of the tunnel, they were outside. The driver asked where to go, and Director Park told him to head for the helicopter immediately. As they made for the helipad, a massive explosion erupted, and the entire place began to collapse. The old man yelled for the driver to floor it. Then, shooting out of the tunnel, the sword came flying at high speed, cutting through the surrounding trees as it raced toward their car and slammed into it. The vehicle spun out, crashed into a tree, and left them all stunned. The sword then flew straight back to Takeshi Young, and now it was clear. He really had received the sword's blessing, letting him control it however he wanted. The crash had thrown the president to the ground, and he started cursing Takeshi Young. He demanded that Takeshi give back his daughter. But Takeshi Young barely reacted. He looked into the president's eyes and, remembering what had been done with the sword, seemed to ask his own parents if they would return him too. Then, without a second thought, he controlled the sword and drove it straight through the old man. That was likely the president's end. Inside the car, Director Park was still alive and opened fire on Takeshi Young, but it did nothing. With a flick, Takeshi sent the sword at him, killing him on the spot. He then noticed Director Yang had escaped, but for now, the president came first. The others could wait. Meanwhile, at the Blue House, people were asking where the president was and why the meeting hadn't started. Everyone was already assembled when, entering the room, the secretary announced she had terrible news. President Yang was dead. The room erupted, and people panicked, wondering what they were supposed to do now. They couldn't just hold another election. Then an old man walked in through a rear door, telling everyone to calm down. He was here, so there was no need to panic. The secretary looked relieved, because this was the party's former leader, a man who had served in Congress for 8 consecutive terms. He was the one behind everything, the one giving orders to the president, and he was also the president's father. His name was Jang Yong-hoo. He stepped forward and told the secretary to schedule a press conference for later. Someone in the crowd quietly wondered if the prime minister shouldn't be the one to take over. Jang cut him off, saying all of this had happened because his son ignored his orders and acted alone. He warned them not to do anything foolish and to follow his instructions. Everyone fell silent at once and quickly fell in line. Back at the base, a woman was watching the scene, seeing everything Takeshi Young was doing. She said it was far worse than it looked in the videos. Seeing it in person was insane. Over the comms, some soldiers told her they were almost there, but she immediately ordered them to turn back. If they went in, they'd die for sure. One of them didn't want to listen and kept pushing toward the site, but she told him he didn't understand. The sword in Takeshi's hand was moving on its own. It was practically alive. Nothing about this was human. Several vehicles started approaching the area, including a helicopter. The president really was dead, and Takeshi said he'd promised to wipe out that whole family, and that was exactly what he was doing. He spoke to the dying president, saying he knew the one behind everything was his father, because he'd overheard the man's people talking. Then with a leap, he jumped toward the helicopter and grabbed onto it. On the ground, soldiers shouted not to fire. They might hit the man inside the helicopter. The pilot was terrified, but he asked the protagonist where he wanted to go, while the sword flew beside them, and Takeshi answered, the Blue House. He was to take him there. The pilot obeyed and steered that way. Below, a soldier reported to the commander that the helicopter was heading for Seoul, straight toward the Blue House. On the way, the pilot said they should take the long route, because the closest zone was packed with constant surveillance and security. Getting through there would be nearly impossible. There was also already an order on this helicopter: fire immediately, no warning. If they kept going, it would basically be suicide. He knew Takeshi had survived a missile before, but if this helicopter exploded, he had no idea whether Takeshi could survive a fall from that height. Even if he landed in a river, it wouldn't be easy. Every soldier in base already knew they were coming, and once he hit the water, he wouldn't get a chance to breathe, because bombardment would start immediately. But the protagonist said none of that mattered and told him to keep flying in that direction. The pilot started lamenting his fate. He knew that once they crossed that line, the helicopter would be bombed. Takeshi Young had superhuman abilities, so maybe he'd live, but the pilot wouldn't. As they neared the capital's defense command, word came in that Takeshi Young had boarded a helicopter, and bullets immediately began tearing through the air toward it. The gunners didn't care at all about the soldier inside and kept firing without hesitation. But Takeshi used his sword like a spinning fan, deflecting every shot. The pilot couldn't believe what he was seeing, but once Takeshi pointed the way and told him where to go, the helicopter headed there. On the ground, someone demanded to know how they still couldn't bring down one simple helicopter. How could they be this incompetent? The constant attacks were starting to annoy the protagonist, and with his sword, he began wrecking everything around him. Looking down afterward, he realized the city had already suffered enormous damage, but he kept moving toward his destination. At the Blue House, the old man began mourning his son's death, especially now, when he had finally reached the place he'd always wanted. He truly seemed to feel the loss. Then, in his office, the secretary rushed in again to report that Takeshi Young was coming there, and they needed to retreat. The old man said he understood, and we cut back again, to the helicopter. As they crossed the city, more shots kept coming, but Takeshi still knocked them all away with his sword. He knew the helicopter couldn't hold out much longer, so he decided to try something else. Using the sword for support, he grabbed the pilot in his arms and took off, flying, while holding on to the blade and moving even faster across the city. At this point, Takeshi had become absurdly overpowered. Apparently he could even fly now. At that speed, he quickly closed in on the Blue House and reached the surrounding area. The moment he touched down, reports came in that Takeshi Young had breached the Blue House. Soldiers immediately surrounded them and warned that they wouldn't let him cross that line. He answered that anyone who wanted to die could shoot. That would be the signal for them all to begin. Then we cut to the committee, where they said the military was bombing the entire city and causing massive civilian casualties. If this kept up, their credibility would collapse, and the city was already descending into chaos. One of them asked whether they really intended to keep going like this. The old man replied that the government couldn't just sit idle while being attacked. But another man said this was madness. They were even willing to blow up the Blue House, where they themselves were, just to try to stop him, and it probably wouldn't even work. The others were starting to openly disagree with him. The head of political affairs suggested that the only way to stop Takeshi might be to talk to him, that someone should go outside and try, because he saw no other way. Another man pointed out that all they'd done so far was order more and more bombardment, without sparing a single thought for the civilians living in the city. Silence filled the room, and the old man asked what exactly he had in mind, then told him to explain. On the news, reports spread that Takeshi Young was now inside the Blue House and hadn't done anything since entering. The anchor added that the army had declared full martial law surrounding the Blue House inside and out. Meanwhile, while he remained there, the number of civilian casualties had risen sharply, and it was also reported that he had seized an active-duty helicopter, which had caused this whole uproar. On the other side of the city, watching all of this, a girl stood there deep in thought, even whispering his name. It was the nurse who had taken care of the protagonist back at the beginning. Then someone started banging on her door, calling her by name, Kim Bora. The man asked if she was the nurse from Hayam University Hospital, and she said yes, asking who he was. He kept pounding hard enough to scare her. She cracked the door open, leaving the chain on, and the man shoved his face into the gap, claiming he was police. He asked if she was really not going to open the door, because he had a few questions about someone staying there without papers. Kim Bora immediately panicked. She had cared for Takeshi for a while. Jumping back a little, before that supposed officer reached her home, she had been blaming herself, thinking she hadn't paid enough attention to his condition, and feeling terrible about everything happening to him. She felt she should have done more to keep him calm. Then the man knocked on her door, and we see the same scene play out again. He said he was police and asked her to open up. From the other side, she spotted a man in a police uniform telling her to take the chain off first, but she didn't believe he was really a cop, and in a trembling voice, she said she wouldn't open it. The man started getting angry and ordered her to open the door immediately, but at that moment, he was suddenly struck down, along with the others with him. Someone else had taken them out, and when she got to the door, she saw it was a girl. It was Ji Yoon. She said she'd been delayed a little, but had still made it in time. Cutting back to Takeshi Young at the Blue House, he was with that police officer who had fainted during all the chaos but had now woken up. As he came to, he realized he was still alive and figured he must have somehow gotten away from Takeshi Young. He even wondered if everything had just been a dream, but then when he looked to the side, he saw him right there and instantly panicked. He thought this was the worst possible moment to wake up and that he should have kept pretending to be unconscious. He wondered where he was. This was the Blue House, and there were quite a few people standing there, basically being held hostage by Taker Sayunk. He thought the whole thing was insane and couldn't understand how he'd ended up there. The protagonist tells him that now that he's awake, there's something he needs him to do, a favor. Around the Blue House, the guy was now free, and the protagonist gave him a mission. He went straight to the Air Force Command, basically to turn himself in. He stated that he was the helicopter pilot who had brought Taker Sayunk there. One of the men asked if that was true, and he said yes. He explained that he was a soldier, and a captain no less. But instead of helping stop a national crisis, he'd aided it. So several men intercepted him and forced him to the ground. They told him this could be treated as treason, and that military prosecutors would investigate him before taking him to court. Meanwhile, as he was being escorted away, they put him in a vehicle. To him, facing military prosecutors and a treason trial was 100,000 times better than staying with Taker Sayunk. At least there, he had a better chance of getting out in one piece. But then the truck they were in suddenly flipped over, and he was thrown out. In midair, Taker Sayunk caught him. He hadn't escaped at all. All the soldiers around them quickly surrounded them and gave the order to fire. The protagonist threw him to the ground and with a leap, left the area again. The guy couldn't understand why he was doing this to him. Even so, he returned to the military command once again. The man there asked how he'd come back, and why he'd run in the first place. Taker Sayunk had invaded the command base because he was looking for him. The officer asked if he was seriously trying to commit treason, but the soldier said he had a message from Taker Sayunk. Something for future negotiations. If any of them laid a hand on Han Ji-hun, he wouldn't forgive them. And that man was none other than him. So the order given to everyone was clear. They were not to touch this soldier. Outside, Taker Sayunk watched everything, clearly working through some kind of plan. Back at that moment in the Blue House, Senior Secretary for Political Affairs Minri Untai had arrived. He came with the others from that meeting, and the soldier accompanying the protagonist received them right at the entrance, then guided them to the protagonist's current location. The old man said it was a pleasure to meet him, and Taker Sayunk was there, sitting calmly. The soldier with him couldn't understand why the old man was treating him so well when he was a wanted man. The official said they should introduce themselves first, and that he was the Senior Secretary of Public Relations. But before he could finish, the protagonist cut in. He only had two demands. First, everyone in Seoul had to leave the city, no exceptions. Second, all heads of the national departments had to gather there at the Blue House. The man was confused. President Jang was already dead, so was he asking for his father to come too? That old man? The protagonist said they had until midnight tomorrow to complete both tasks, or something would happen. In the car, halfway there, one of the men said this was insane. Mobilizing all the city's military forces was difficult, but still possible. Evacuating 10 million people from Seoul in just 18 hours, though, was beyond absurd. So he called the protagonist crazy and said the mission was nearly impossible. The soldier with the protagonist asked why he wanted everyone out of Seoul, and Tae Sung said the city would soon become a battlefield. He had no interest in watching innocent people die because of him. When they arrived at the operations center, one man asked how the conversation with Tae-sung had gone and what exactly he'd demanded. The man explained his request, and everyone there thought it was complete madness, basically impossible to carry out. The old man stayed silent after hearing it all. One official said they needed to move the government headquarters and the national councils to another city before anything happened. Another man argued that dealing with them would be easy enough, but the real issue was how to get Seoul's citizens out in only 18 hours. One of them said it simply couldn't be done, and they should ignore the demand. But another argued they at least had to show they were trying, because if they didn't show even that much, it could make the protagonist even angrier. He knew how hard this was. There were 18 million people. Another man asked if anyone realized how much an evacuation on that scale would cost. It would be over 2 million, he said, and would throw Seoul into total chaos. So who was going to take responsibility for that? And who would deal with the fallout? The old man remained silent. He knew that if the protagonist wanted everyone gathered there, it was because he planned to deal with him. Then we cut back to Kim Bora, the nurse who took care of the protagonist at the beginning. Chaeyeon was at her door, praising her for realizing those men weren't police. Still, she added, Kim Bora had been a little slow. The girl looked confused. She didn't know Chaeyeon. Chaeyeon introduced herself as Tae-sung's best friend, then snapped the door chain. She confirmed that the men who came for Bora had intended to take her somewhere unknown, and that they were Aegis Security. Aegis was the organization run by the blonde guy's father. Definitely not the police. Kim Bora seemed to know about the organization, which made things easier for Chaeyeon. Bora clearly understood what was going on and was prepared. Chaeyeon said they were both worried about Tae-sung, then asked if she wanted to come with her, though she was also pointing a gun at her, so it wasn't exactly a suggestion. Kim Bora started following her, and when she looked out the window, she saw more Aegis people below. Chaeyeon warned her that under no circumstances could she let them take her, because if that happened, they'd definitely kill her, so she had to make sure it didn't. Then Chaeyeon pulled out a stick of encapsulated TNT and threw it into the building, hitting some of the Aegis soldiers already moving in. Kim Bora wasn't used to seeing anything like that, and she was already getting scared. Chaeyeon told her they didn't have time for that. If she felt sorry for them, she could die with them too. Then the scene shifts to St. Michael Monastery, where several men had gathered. They were Chinese secret agents, there to spy on Korea. They discussed how other countries would probably show up as well, Germany and Japan included, so they needed to stay alert. The moment those forces appeared, they had to be ready. But as they watched the monastery, someone emerged from inside, and the person seemed incredibly strong. In the blink of an eye, that figure wiped out the entire Chinese unit. Apparently, he was a superhuman too, just like Taki. Then we moved to the Capital Defense Command, where everyone was gathered. They were discussing that exact incident, the destruction of the capital's defenses around the Han River, and how those troops had been ambushed across the city. The old man asked whether they had prepared properly, and they replied that they were ready for any enemy action. After all, they still didn't know who was behind it, since Takasayang was at the Blue House, so they were already suspecting that spies from other countries had entered the area. Back at the Blue House, the guy wondered why no one was doing anything. He hadn't seen a single evacuation order. There wasn't much time left until midnight, and only then did it hit him that he was probably a hostage. Even so, he felt strangely free for one, since no one was stopping him from moving around there. But he knew it didn't really matter whether he was free or not. Takisa-young was with him, and wherever he went, he'd be found. The protagonist walked up and told him they were leaving. The guy was confused, but they ended up driving out of the Blue House in a truck. The news was immediately reported back to the organization, while the guy regretted that he had no idea where he was supposed to go, and was too scared to ask. The protagonist simply told him to keep driving forward, and he obeyed. The guy couldn't stop thinking about how terrifying he was, and as he looked at the streets, he saw people living peacefully. Some were even playing outside at a time like this. He wondered if they had never been warned, or if the alert system had failed. Apparently, no order had been given at all, even though this should have been an evacuation. Nothing had been done. He figured that now that the protagonist had taken over the Blue House, no one really had the option to choose what to do or not do anymore. The protagonist was basically in control of the country, so all they could do was obey him. Meanwhile, a helicopter seemed to locate where they were heading and began tracking them, and the protagonist was on his way to the National Assembly. The soldiers were furious, wondering what he planned to do at the National Assembly this time. There weren't even any troops stationed there. Then word came in that Takeshi-young had changed course. He was no longer heading to the assembly. The scene shifts to BTN Broadcasting, where the latest news is coming in. They were still reporting that Takeshi-young was on his way to the National Assembly. Just as the segment was about to begin, the anchor says that according to the latest reports, Takeshi-young is heading there now. Then the studio is suddenly struck by something, and stepping out from the back, it's Takeshi-young. He had broken straight into the station. The soldier with him orders the staff to get the broadcast ready immediately and keep the cameras rolling. Everything the protagonist says must go live, or something very bad will happen. A moment later, the protagonist is already on every giant screen across the city, and on TVs all over Seoul. He announces that President Jong is dead and that he killed him himself. People panic instantly, terrified by the announcement. He reveals that he had already warned the organization, demanding that all Seoul citizens be evacuated by midnight, and that they bring the department leader to him, but they ignored him. And now that he knows who their leader is, he says everyone will be punished for it, because the government refused to take his demands seriously. Everyone is stunned. Even the soldier beside him had no idea he was about to say something this explosive. He admits that no matter how strong he is, he can't fight Seoul alone. But first, he says, if any troops are found that weren't withdrawn, he won't leave a single man alive. Back at the organization's committee, they wonder if he's insane, if this lunatic is really challenging the entire army. But one man says he's right. They have no direct way to answer this. The old man insists they must announce that the citizens will not evacuate and that he refuses to obey. If they don't stand firm now, the public will fall into chaos. The others can't believe he's doing this, but he says Taixung would never slaughter innocent people, and he's convinced of that. Even if he did, it would only make the public hate him more. All 10 million citizens of Seoul would turn against him. Another man realizes that if this happens, he'll be using the people of Seoul as hostages. Then Taixung adds a second demand. All active police in Seoul must disarm and abandon their stations. In other words, Seoul will be left lawless. Anyone who refuses will be punished without exception. And finally, for every citizen living in Seoul, any violation will be punished, and no one's safety can be guaranteed. Old man Yang is watching it all too, twisting with anger in his room. At the hospital, Mr. Yang, the guy the protagonist beat down earlier, is recovering, and in front of him stands Xiang Hua, the mysterious guy in the yellow hood. He asks about the situation. Mr. Yang says nothing unusual happened, but Xiang Hua is clearly furious. He wants to know who did this to his brother, and vows to find him and kill him. From that moment on, that lunatic sets out to hunt Taixung. Back with old man Yang, he asks one of his men what happened in Seoul. The man explains that Taixung seized the Blue House the day before, and all the governors and politicians, including Han Taixung, were evacuated. The old man is shocked. He says Taixung is completely unpredictable. Then he asks about Muyol and is told he's awake. They injected him with serum, and he's recovering very quickly. The old man asks if they found Xiang Hua, but the man says he hasn't been answering messages and seems to be ignoring them on purpose. This is the same Xiang Hua now with Mr. Yang in the hospital, the one who swore to beat the protagonist. Then the aide adds that 3 samples of a serum were stolen from the Kook-1 lab, and the security footage clearly shows that Xiang Hua was the thief. The old man realizes something huge is about to happen. Back with the protagonist, the soldier beside him wonders why he wants to drag innocent civilians into this. They had nothing to do with it. He says that when he first heard his speech back in that building, he was glad he was doing this. But now he doesn't understand why he's threatening ordinary people too. Was this all just revenge against the government? None of it makes sense. If he wanted the people in charge, he could have just gone after them directly. He can't understand it, and starts wondering if Young is just taking his anger out on everyone. They reach the elevator, and once they step inside, he asks the protagonist if they're heading back to the Blue House. He says no. First, he's getting a helicopter. Karen is still confused by his plan. The button is pressed, and the elevator starts going up. Just before the doors close, someone strange slips inside. It's Xiang Hua. The soldier tries to signal him not to come in. After all, that's Tae Sung, the most wanted man in Korea right now. Maybe even the world. He keeps trying to warn him to leave, asking why he's just standing there, but the guy ignores him completely. The soldier wonders if he's blind. Tae Sung is right beside him, but the protagonist doesn't seem bothered either. He starts to wonder why this man entered the elevator at all. Then it hits him. He has a plan. The guy is holding something in his hand. That device he fitted onto it earlier. One look at his face and the soldier sees bulging veins starting to appear. Now he realizes this man isn't normal. Tae Sung senses his aura too, but before he can react, the guy slams a hit into his chest and follows with a knee to the chin. 2 clean blows, and he couldn't even respond. The soldier inside can't process what's happening. For a moment, this madman had actually overpowered the undefeated Tae Seong, and now we finally see his face. Obvious proof that this guy is no ordinary human. But the protagonist is completely unharmed. He barely felt a thing. He throws a punch, but the man dodges instantly and strikes him in the face with something. It's the first opponent who's truly giving the protagonist a real fight. The soldier can only wonder who the hell this guy is. The elevator can't withstand the force of the clash anymore, and finally gives way. Their battle is getting insane. All the soldier can do is cry. Caught in the middle of it, he has no chance of surviving on his own. After the elevator crashes, the protagonist helps the soldier survive. Outside, the fight keeps going. Karen is incredibly fast and catches up to him in an instant. The soldier can't believe he's still alive. He knows now these aren't 2 humans fighting. These freaks are superhuman. He keeps wondering what that lunatic even is as the battle rages on. The guy is absurdly fast, but Tae Sung doesn't look afraid. If anything, it's the opposite. During one charge, he grabs him by the throat. The protagonist tells him he needs to hear something. He has an important appointment now, and no time for a petty fight. The man then notices the sword that was on his back is gone. He glances behind him and is struck immediately. The blow smashes him into the wall. A normal human would never survive that. After that, the protagonist and the soldier start leaving the area. But when we cut back to the other guy, he's still standing. His body clearly isn't normal. He pulls something from his pocket and injects it into his neck. For now, we still don't know what happened to him. Back with Tae Sung and the soldier, they reach the helipad and realize the TV station people already took the helicopter. The protagonist tells him to get them a helicopter. The soldier is baffled. How is he supposed to do that when there isn't one there? Pointing upward, Tae Sung says one has been circling Willis for a while. He tells the soldier to signal them to come down. Up in that helicopter, they spot him and recognize him immediately. Immediately, they know he's the one acting as Tae-sung's middleman, the guy helping that monster. They see him trying to say something, and through binoculars, they realize he's signaling for them to land. The soldiers in the helicopter say that would be practically suicidal, so why would they do it? But before they can decide, the protagonist's sword is already pressed against the window. That makes it clear. They have no choice but to give up the helicopter, so they land. They hand it over to the protagonist and the other guy. When asked where they're going, Tae-sung says he wants the nearest bridge. The soldier is confused by the choice, still thinking about the civilians there. He keeps asking why he can't just go fight the army directly, and if it's the nearest bridge, then that would be Mapo Bridge. Back at the organization, they've just received word that Tae-sung has stolen a helicopter. They learned he'd stolen a helicopter and left the station. The room went quiet and they asked what else he'd done. Then another update came in. One look at the young staffer's face told them it was bad. The old man asked what happened. Shaking, she said another report had just arrived. The Mapo Bridge had been destroyed. No one could believe it. The massive bridge connecting the city was gone. Even the soldier was stunned that it had all been wiped out in an instant. With Mapo Bridge down, the protagonist told them to head for the next one. News reports were already naming Tae-sung as the man behind the chaos. They said he'd escaped, and that the city's main bridge over the Seoham River had been completely destroyed. But even as that report aired, another alert came in. Seogang Bridge and Wonryo Bridge had also been destroyed. Then came word that 2 more bridges had fallen, and cameras had caught Tae-sung destroying them in real time as he moved from bridge to bridge. He was sabotaging his own country without the slightest hesitation. People trying to flee were stopped. The bridges leading out were no longer usable, and every district of Seoul was now sealed off. There was no way out. People could only wonder why he was doing this. Panic spread through the city. People cried out for their parents. Meanwhile, the protagonist kept bringing everything down. They finally understood his plan, to paralyze all traffic in Seoul and lock the city in gridlock. In one home, a family watched it unfold on TV. The father couldn't understand why this was happening, and all he could think about was what it would cost to rebuild those bridges. His wife said they needed to leave Seoul too. It was getting far too dangerous. Their teenage daughter, clueless as ever, complained that she was supposed to meet her friends today, and that this was so annoying. Then another bulletin came in. Several inmates had escaped from a prison in southern Seoul. Calls were flooding in, but there seemed to be no police available to respond. Authorities told citizens not to go outside and to lock themselves inside their homes. The father kept asking how everything had collapsed so suddenly, but the city was already in total chaos. Escaped prisoners were taking over the streets, and there were no soldiers protecting the public. Crime was erupting across Seoul. Robberies and assaults were happening non-stop. The crazed mobs smashed anything in front of them. By now, it was clear Tae-sung's threat had made proper policing impossible. The man suddenly remembered the children were still at school, and everyone panicked. He told them to grab their things right now. They had to get out before it was too late. Public safety had completely collapsed. Back at the organization, they watched the news in shock, helpless before the situation. South Korea's capital had effectively fallen, and the city center was in complete ruin. Back with the protagonist, the helicopter had landed. Looking out over the city, they saw the chaos below. They had returned to the Blue House. One soldier looked at Tae-sung and wondered if this was really what he wanted Korea to become. To him, that place held nothing but painful memories, and no one had ever helped him. Back at the organization, a woman explained that he'd been planning this since yesterday. He had returned to his home country under emergency measures, and now he was back at the Blue House. They wondered where the United States was in all this, and why it wasn't helping an ally in crisis. Someone urged them to contact the Americans immediately and ask for help, but the old man stopped them. He said he would make the call himself. Then he contacted the Pentagon. There they had been watching everything the protagonist was doing. They were trying to classify him, wondering if it might be some form of psychokinesis. What they were seeing was unlike anything they'd ever encountered. They had no explanation for it. All they knew was that the military would love to possess something like this. The question was whether they could defeat it. They decided to consult DARPA and see if it had any answer. DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. One of the men said they worked on all kinds of things, and they even discussed whether his relatives could be used as leverage in some negotiation. But then he dismissed the idea. Tae-sung had already killed his country's president and seized his residence by force. He asked them to imagine if this weren't happening in Korea, but in the United States, how would they respond? Another man said Korea was strong, but it was nothing compared to the United States. But the first one pushed back. What if he set foot on American soil himself? What would they do if he brought the same destruction there that he was unleashing in Korea? Would they need to drop some kind of bomb on the mainland? Just then, a man entered the room with new information, a direct message from Korea's acting president. They realized the old man's call had reached them. One of them said he'd been waiting for their response. The acting president was asking for help, but instead of sending troops, he said they should withdraw them immediately. The United States had an understanding with Tae-sung, and he would spare their families, so he ordered every American soldier stationed in Korea to be pulled out at once. The blonde officer said he'd carry it out, but asked if they really weren't going to answer the Korean president. The reply was cold. Ignore it. He'll understand if we don't respond. The best move is for the United States to stay out of this. Soon the results of that meeting were broadcast on television. They declared that their duty was to protect Korea's democracy and freedom, and that the United States and South Korea shared an eternal alliance. They said they would contain all attacks and provocations from the Korean side. But this was not a case of provocation by a foreign invasion, nor was it a crisis that legally constituted war. In other words, they were calling it Korea's internal problem. They said Korea would have to handle it itself, since this was not an international matter. Still, they hoped the decision would support the military and strengthen friendship between the United States and Korea, bringing the two countries even closer. The old man could only seethe with anger. He realized he'd have to deal with this alone, while all of his allies abandoned him.